the workshop meeting. So can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hi everyone, this is Lori Kowalski. And first of all, we'd like to make a few announcements. We're sure you have all heard about Dr. Ross, who has decided to leave the Board of Education. We're very sad about her departure, and we wish her well. In addition, Dr. Seinfeld is retiring and moving on into higher education. Her retirement is effective December 31st, 2020, which enables her to still drive the reopening of our schools. It's a testament to Dr. Seinfeld that she was selected to serve as the Dean of the College of Education, Information and Technology at Long Island University for both Post and Brooklyn campuses. We will miss her, and although we do look forward to working with her for another 5 months on the safe reopening of our schools. I know that there have been questions about the board seat, and as far as the board seat is concerned, we have decided to leave it open for now so we can focus on the safe reopening of our schools and the search for a new superintendent, which will absorb much of our time. We have issued an RFP for a search firm to assist us in finding Dr. Seinfeld's replacement. Dr. Seinfeld, I turn it over to you for the workshop agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Kowalski, and thank you to any members of our learning community who are listening and who I believe are able to follow along on the PowerPoint that is on the live stream. So as you know, we have been working diligently on a plan for the safe reopening of our schools in the fall. Our goal is to reopen our schools safely in person for our students and staff. We know that whatever plan we have, it could change based on data and based on directives from the State Education Department as well as the Governor's Office. I would like to thank the Board of Education, all of our administrators, staff, all families for so much feedback, formally and informally, including through our surveys, to help create our options for the board's consideration this evening. As the board is aware, school districts must prepare 3 possible scenarios for instruction: in-person, remote, or hybrid, which is a combination of the 2. For tonight, what I'd like to talk about is what we have done thus far. I would like to then provide you with an overview of the options. I would like to then have us keep a separate list that Ms. Nolan is going to keep for any open items that you would like more information about at our additional meeting on the 4th, a week from tonight. We'll call that our parking lot. So thank you, Ms. Nolan, for your help with that. Before I talk directly to this slide, I do want to mention that I appreciate the community reaching out to Ms. Nolan, the district clerk, with some questions to us, to me, to the Board of Education about our reopening and as well as some other topics. Some of the answers will be embedded in this presentation and others will be answered at future meetings. Some of the questions we received are: how are we keeping students safe, mitigating risk, and especially for those with vulnerable family members? When will the plan be made public? Are we looking at all available building space so that we can bring all students back to school safely? Is there a plan when and if there is a positive test? How will we handle anybody, especially students, who don't wear face coverings when required to do so? Will there be daily temperature checks? Will there be mask breaks? Have we considered purchasing dividers or desk guards? And will there be options for all-in, hybrid, and remote? In addition, the Board of Education did receive questions about how it plans to address racial injustice, equity, and diversity through a program and an approach for cultural responsiveness. And related to that, how will DASA, or the Dignity for All Students Act, be protected in a virtual environment? Two of the other questions that Ms. Kowalski just actually answered: what is the Board of Ed's plan for hiring its next superintendent, and what is the Board of Education's plan for Dr. Ross, the available seat because of Dr. Ross? Going back to my replacement, the specific question was, what is the Board of Education looking for in a superintendent? And I'm sure there'll be lots of communication around that, especially working with a search firm. Now on to our road to re-entry. In the spring, when we were still in the school buildings closed mode, we began to lay the groundwork for what reopening would look like. Part of that was assessing our digital learning model and what was going well and what needed to be improved. Next, in the end of May and then appointed officially in early June, a district-wide re-entry committee was formed and appointed, and a number of subcommittees were created. I'd like to take a moment here to thank Mr. Cronin, Ms. Santos, and Mr. Bosi for serving on that committee, as well as Dr. Mulhall, Mr. Cipriani, and everybody else who will have their names in our district plan that we need to submit later this week. So if anybody is listening, thank you so much. We have met 6 times as a district committee, and our 7th meeting is tomorrow afternoon, reminder, at 4:30 p.m. on a Google Meet. And all of the subcommittees have met numerous times as well. While waiting patiently, or in some days less patiently, for formal guidance from the state, the committees met regularly and took as many proactive steps as possible, knowing what precautions we wanted to put in place for all of our students. This slide provides a timetable of the guidance we received. But I think it's important that you know that, of course, we did not wait until receiving the guidance, which was not until July 16th, to begin our careful and strategic planning well before we received the guidance. I want to point your attention to the last 3 bullets on this slide. On July, because this was critical to our deliberations about what is the best and safest way to bring students back. On July 16th, we received the 140-page state guidance document. I see Mr. Cronin has it in his binder, and it's quite the document. On July 17th, the state offered a frequently asked question, FAQ document, with clarification on a key component, the guideline for social distancing. It stated, schools require one of the following: 6-foot social distancing, or barriers, or face coverings. Then, on July 22nd, we received another FAQ document that provided another update. Schools must ensure that appropriate social distancing, i.e. 6 feet / which we know means or barriers, is maintained. So that's the guidance that we received only about a week ago. We are working diligently on our reopening plan. I'd like to thank Ms. Fabrizio for taking the lead in pulling together all the pieces that we have sent her, and the plan needs to include all of these components: communication, health and safety. Some of these we'll go into more detail about than others. We have had to look at every aspect of facilities. How are we going to serve our students their meals? We will talk a bit this evening and continue next week, I anticipate, on transportation. The social and emotional, or SEL, well-being of our students. Various school schedules that we have looked at from every angle. How we are required to take attendance, whether students are in school or learning remotely. What type of technology and connectivity we need. What the goals are in meeting the state standards and delivering an equitable and rigorous teaching and learning program. Making sure that we are following all students' IEPs, individualized education plans for special education, as well as supporting students who are bilingual. We also still have to have a plan for teacher and principal evaluation, and the guidance needs to include attestations about the certifications of our teachers. By the way, I'm going to keep going and stop at critical points when I need board input, but if there are any questions or comments, please let me know and I would be happy to do my best to answer them. To date, we have had a lot of communication with our community, and when I remind all of us that communication is not just us telling people, but also asking for input, which we have done through a number of surveys. We've posted signage in our school buildings, and we, of course, have spent a great deal of time examining all state guidance, which includes both the State Education Department and the Department of Health, including this critical issue about the definition of social distancing. We have also, to date, put many, many health and safety protocols in place, including cleaning and disinfecting in accordance with CDC guidelines. I'd like to thank Mr. Cipriani and Ms. Neisling for their diligent work with that, in addition to our custodial staff. We've ordered personal protective equipment, PPE, and including face coverings for students and staff. And I'd like to remind everybody here this evening, both virtually and in this room, that face coverings are going to be required when social distancing cannot be maintained. We've developed protocols with health staff, including our district doctor, as well as one of our nurses. Thank you to Dr. Strasberg and Ms. McCartney for protocols related to signs of illness, plans for daily temperature screening, which we will have a vendor here shortly to share an overview of a product for that, screenings for anybody coming into the building, and how families will need to support this work in terms of looking for signs of illness in their children. We've developed an action plan with health staff for if and when there is a suspected case, and we do have written protocols to follow that comply with the Department of Health and CDC guidelines, and enforcing correct hand washing and respiratory hygiene through signage throughout our buildings. In terms of facilities, and this answers one of the questions that we received from a community member, we were proactive and we were hoping that the guidance would match our ordering, and it did, which was that we ordered what you see a picture of on the right, in the middle picture, protective materials, including 3-sided desk guards for every single student and every single teacher. We've also ordered standing partitions to help divide spaces and make more use of space and distance our learning population the best that we can. Portable sinks, and also additional hand sanitizer stations. We've looked at every space. I'd like to thank our principals and our head custodians in particular, who work very closely with Dr. Mulhall to look at every possible space in coming up with the learning options that I will outline in just a moment. We also ordered partitions to divide larger spaces. And these were all ordered before we got the state guidance, because the last thing we would want is to get the guidance that we can have these dividers, especially the dividers to protect our students and teachers, and then not be able to get them because they would not be available. We have been told by the vendor we will have them in plenty of time. A critical part of this plan is transportation, and I do remind the Board of Education and anybody listening that, of course, and we thank the community for its support, that after a great amount of study, we have a successful referendum providing universal transportation for our elementary students and reducing the mileage limit for the high school to 0.5 miles. We do know that density on the buses is a concern. And while the guidance does say 6-foot distancing or masks, it may be prudent for us to know how many families would be willing to transport their own children in lieu of using the buses. As such, we put that out as part of our survey, and as you could see, that 75.3% of respondents would be willing to walk or drive their children to school if limited bus transportation becomes an issue. We do not have to decide right this minute, this evening. I'm suggesting that that's something we talk about next week, but I think it's great that we could see that our community wants to partner with us to hopefully reopen schools for as many students as possible. The next chart outlines some of the many aspects that we've had to look at. Child nutrition and how meals will be served. Social emotional learning, and a survey that is going out this week. I'd like to thank Mr. Trentowski and his committee for taking the lead on that. Attendance will need to be taken daily, whether students are in school or learning remotely. We will provide devices to all students and be sure that they're able to connect. We will ensure that all curriculum and instruction is aligned with the New York State learning standards. And of course, we will follow all regulations regarding servicing the needs of our subgroups, including students for whom English is not a first language. So now we get to the meat of our conversation, which is we are required to submit plans for in-school, remote, and hybrid, and that plan should be communicated with as much notice as possible to families. And so my plan is to, and I have something ready to go depending on the options that the board selects this evening, so that families and teachers, of course, will know what the plan is. Our goal is to open our schools safely for all or as many students and staff as possible for instruction on a daily basis. We know that we need substantive interaction between students and families. We also know that equity must be at the heart of all instructional decisions. In terms of where we think we are with our families, the majority of our families expressed that they were comfortable sending their children back to school in the fall. 65% indicated that they were either somewhat or very comfortable sending their children back to school, and that was with 522 responses. So our goals throughout our return, especially in the first phase, and it's important to know that whatever we do, we will continue to assess and evaluate and make modifications as needed. We want our learners to feel connected to school, their teachers, and to their peers. We want instructional experiences to be comparable in rigor, scope, and magnitude as they would be in a traditional, outstanding Oyster Bay East Norwich education. And we want to have a plan, and we believe we do, that transitions between in-person and remote learning will be made seamlessly so that we can pivot as needed. We do have a number of parameters and constraints, as we know, in our district and across all school districts. There are state guidelines and the associated timelines for receiving those. There are physical resources, mostly space, the limitations that we have, and of course there are human resources, the number of people we have to support learning and teaching and to supervise students safely. So our process is to determine what is possible, operationalize, iterate, and improve. And that is what we plan to do in the first phase and throughout our return to school. I want you to know also that in our determining what is possible, many of us, myself included, remain in close contact with colleagues across the county and with health officials, including the Department of Health. And I do want you to know at this time where the county sits with their proposed plans. Not all are solidified. The majority of schools at this point, 75%, are planning to have elementary students or are working toward having elementary students all in every day. Many districts are trying to have their middle school, or are planning to have their middle school hybrid, meaning some type of alternate day or split schedule or alternate week approach, which is 66%. And the vast majority of high schools are looking at a hybrid model, mostly because most Long Island school districts have as rich an instructional program as we do. 91% of those reported are planning to do some type of hybrid at the high school level. Our goals for when we have remote instruction, if we have to close schools, is that students at home will follow a schedule that mirrors a typical school day, as you'll see from the sample schedules that we have enclosed for you. That they will participate in live meetings with their teachers and their classmates throughout the day. And this is all based on our review and assessment and, of course, the feedback that we have received about how digital learning went in the spring. As a sample, this is a proposed schedule for Oyster Bay High School, and as you could see, we are planning for a schedule that looks just like this or very similar to this be used no matter what the schedule would be. We did need to build in some additional transition time for staggering movement between periods and cleaning, and also if we are pivoting to at home for students to be able to take breaks from their devices. In any case, we expect a full day of engaged student learning with a schedule. Please also know that based on the feedback that Ms. Lasher received on her survey about the pilot programs that we did, the pilot schedules in the last 3 Wednesdays of June, 70% preferred this classic schedule to the block schedule that we did also pilot. Whoops. In elementary, the principals, and I thank Dr. Vacchio and Ms. McElwee and of course Ms. Lasher for all their hard work with these surveys, we did ask about if we were to have digital learning, how would you like your child to receive live instruction? And as you could see, the number one choice, 25.9%, is 50% live and 50% independent. And then next was 24% with 80% live and 20% independent. That told us and tells us that elementary parents do want some flexibility for their children, and they also told us a few points on the right that you'll see that it would be helpful for them to have fewer links to have to connect to and be more streamlined. They very much appreciated the teacher communication the ongoing communication and feedback. They appreciated the teachers posting the to-do list and the daily schedule, but they would like a more structured schedule, more consistency, more routine, and at the Roosevelt School in particular, more time for strategic small group work. Also, they were more appreciative of the children seeing their own teachers on video than those that were from other places on the internet like YouTube. So I'm not going to go into great detail on the virtual schedules, and this is not necessarily the final version. They may be modified a bit, but based on feedback, you'll see that no matter what we are faced with, and if we have to pivot to a virtual schedule, this is a sample Vernon schedule, and as you could see, it is scheduled, it is consistent with live interaction with teachers throughout and across the day. The next slide includes virtual schedules for grades 5 and 6. The same factors apply. You could see what a sample schedule would look like. And similarly, at the Roosevelt School, we've provided you with a sample schedule just so you could see the careful planning that has gone into, into having a full day of learning, but with the flexible time for the small group work that our youngest learners and their families really need and have requested. On our survey, we asked if we are required to use a hybrid approach to learning, meaning part in-school and part remote learning, which would be the preferred approach. And of the K-12 results, you'll see that the majority do want our children in every day. That's the blue, 39.4%, followed by if we had to have a hybrid, parents, families would prefer alternate days than alternate weeks or a split schedule. So now I'd like to provide the board with elementary options for elementary. And I'd like to go through the factors, the pros and cons, and then pause for your discussion and frankly for your decision making, because we do need to have this decision so that we can, of course, comply with the state, but more importantly, communicate with our families so that they can plan accordingly. So, in elementary, we have two options that we're proposing to you. In either case, all students would be in every day. In option A, we would be able to distance students with the 6 feet distancing, but the program would be altered quite dramatically so that every adult and every space would be used to spread students out across the building. There would be drastic impact to programs including our specials in music, our Atlantis program, and our science lab and integration. I'm going to go back into the pros and cons of each. That's just kind of an overview. In option B, students would return to school and the desk guards that we would purchase would be used for the social distancing, which we know complies with the state guidance. Again, all students would return to school. Students would have as close to a typical day as we can have, considering we're still in this COVID pandemic. Most specials would be taught within the classroom to minimize movement around the building, so the teachers would go to the students rather than the students lining up and going to the teacher, cohorting the students, if you will. We would have physical education outside as much as possible, and space would be available to continue music lessons in a way that wouldn't be available in option A. To go more into, trouble clicking and speaking at the same time. To go into more detail about option A on the previous slide, what would that look like? Each class would be split into 2 sections. Students would spend some time in their regular classroom and some time in what we're calling overflow spaces, meaning rooms that would be transformed into classrooms. I know the board has worked diligently to plan for air conditioning in all buildings, but we are not yet there at our elementary schools with air conditioning in the cafeteria or gymnasium, which would need to be used for classroom space. We would also need to use every available special area classroom. Classroom teachers would then split their time between the classroom and the alternate location. We would come up with a schedule for that if this is the selection of the Board of Education. We would, of course, have appropriate staff supervising students in the alternate location. Lunch and specials would have to be moved, And right now, it's difficult to know exactly how many students we will have because we don't know exactly how many students will be returning and how many families will not be comfortable sending their children back to school.
So Dr. Steinfeld, is this synchronous? Like if they're in one location and the teacher's in the other location, this would be a synchronous lesson?
Yes, it is, and that's coming up in 2 slides, but it sure is. Just a few other considerations before we come back to your question, Ms. Santos. In this, the only way we could make this work with the 6-foot distancing at Roosevelt would be that kindergarten, which you probably know, but just in case you don't know, is not required, and it's not required to be full day, would need to be half-day in-person and half-day remote. We would have to look at revising and being sure that our IEPs, individualized education plans, are in accordance and applicable. We would have to use all space, so for that would have been used for the music ensembles, and music lessons would need to be in alternate locations. And basically, every available faculty member would be needed to supervise, which would also be difficult if we do have any teachers absent and covering classes. We would, yes.
Dr. Steinfeld, this is Mr. McAvoy. What role would masks have in this plan, if any?
The guidance says that if we're able to ensure social distancing, we do not have to wear masks. However, masks would need to be worn in times when you can't have social distancing, such as when students are in hallways, arrival, dismissal, transportation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We would basically need to remove all the parts of an elementary classroom that we've come to you to need to love, and would really just have the student desks, which of course would be in rows. We know that that's part of the guidance. To Mrs. Santos's question, what would instruction look like in option A? When the teacher is with the other section, the student would access the lesson via live streaming throughout the day from one part of the building to another. The teachers would also have the opportunity to utilize asynchronous resources, such as materials that are recorded, online resources, and they would also be able to assign students independent or collaborative group work, just as teachers do every day as part of our instructional plan. We would need to talk about how some of the assessments would be conducted, including something like running records, which is an individual assessment that must be one-on-one with students.
And Dr. Steinfeld, this is Lori Kowalski.
Yes, Ms. Kowalski.
In these alternate rooms that are not air conditioned, the gymnasiums and things like that, I think the guidance is you really can't put fans in these rooms.
That's
that
correct.
Right? So these students would be if we just did the 6-foot distancing, we would have some students in these gyms without any fans or anything like that to move the air.
That's correct. And we would not have a choice to do that unless there's no other way to do it, because we would need to use every single space in the room.
Ms. Walsh?
Yes, Mr. Cronin.
To the gyms with no air conditioning and to the cafeteria with no air conditioning, maybe Mr. Superintendent could answer this. Have we looked into renting the portable ones? You see them at big businesses, they sit outside and they pipe it right in.
We can, but there are definite S&D requirements regarding portable structures such as that, so it would probably involve a lengthy approval process. We may not be able to get that done.
It's the same as the portable generator we had at Vernon. It comes on the trailer. Did we get approval for a portable generator when there was no electric there? Remember there was no electric up there? Or was it here? We had no electric when we had the generator.
Yeah,
they're the same type of unit. It's on a trailer, they pull up, they put the pipe right into the school of the area, and they pump it in the cold air.
I mean, anything that's going to be used for instructional space would definitely require some pretty extensive S&D approval. That does take time, so it's something that we can look into in more detail, but generally would require S&D approval.
So, Mr. Cipriani, like in the reopening plan that's going to be submitted on this Friday, there's a facility manager, right? that we also have to put through like things like tents or whatever we use that, if we use it for instruction, so maybe our tents aren't, so they're not be put through that way. But I was just thinking, to Mr. Cronin's point, maybe we add air conditioning for these spaces, just to say we would like to use temporary air conditioning, and see if we can get approved, expedite that approval for this portal process. And we may never use it, but it might be much faster than a traditional SED.
I could ask the architects, but I've been told that the approval process still is pretty lengthy for SED, even if it's a COVID-related addition or something that requires approval. It still requires some engineering, architectural, they go through a whole review process. So it is still a very lengthy process.
We will look at, we'll definitely follow up.
Let me say, just to go back, Ms. Walsh, just go back to what Santos was saying about the tents. Are they going to be heated and air conditioned?
No. Tents, if they have sides, they're considered a structure. So tents require extensive SED approval. If the tents don't have sides, like you're saying, not used for instructional space, the requirements are a lot less. So the tents that we are going to order will not have sides.
And what's the plan to use for those?
Well, we're gonna get to that. That's in here.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to a question that Mr. McAvoy asked about the wearing of face masks, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, our extended year program, you might recall, we are back and we have students here, students who have 12-month services, and we have their teachers and teaching assistants back. And I have to tell you, they are doing beautifully, adjusting to the new protocols, including wearing face coverings. And we're just really excited to have our children back and, of course, our staff back. And so I'm optimistic that the wearing of face coverings is something that our students will be just fine with, as well as our staff. And I thank our teachers for their transition back into our schools. Mr. Cronin, are you good for me to move on?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Sure. So to go back to option A, the pros and cons, if you will. All students in with 6-foot distancing. As we know in both choices, but a pro is all students are in. Students would be with their teacher for half of the day, but not the full day, and there would be the 6-foot distancing. The cons, there's no way that we could do it without having half-day kindergarten remotely. The building would basically become, as one of our principals, I think, named it, a sea of desks, including in every space, some of them less desirable than others. Half the day is remote, but with the synchronous live learning, as Ms. Santos asked, with their teacher. But there would be significant program changes, especially to our specials, and it does require the largest number of faculty and staff to operationalize.
I had a question, Dr. Seinfeld. This is Mr. Giulizi. When you say half-day kindergarten, half-day remote, is that half-day in the building, half-day from home?
Correct.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I will also tell you, since you mentioned that, Dr. Mulhall and I did visit the Boys and Girls Club and spoke to the director about the possibility, if that option is what the Board of Education does select tonight, about the possibility of providing some type of childcare during the half of the day that children aren't here, and that's something that they'd be very comfortable looking at and exploring. So we did want to see if we could help our families with that. They also would consider possibly, it has to only be for school-age children, providing an option possibly for our staff if needed, for children of our staff. Our staff doesn't need childcare. In option B, all students in with the desk guards. The pros, all students return, just as in the first option. Students are with their teacher for the entire day. The program continues as we know it to be, with some modifications, including how we deliver band and ensemble, the ensembles in particular. The cons, the students would be somewhat restricted movement, but the barrier would be what is the equivalent of the 6-foot distancing, as we know from the state guidance, but there would not be as much distancing. So in summary, in A, we would use every space and dramatically alter our program, and in B, we would maintain our program but use the desk guards. So I'm going to pause here and ask for the board to consider the two options, ask any questions if you may have, and hopefully give us direction on which choice, A or B. A, yes.
You might have covered it, I might have missed it. Did you mention that they were OSHA compliant, like the guards?
Thank you. So we looked very closely at the plastic dividers that we showed a picture of, and we'd be happy to, get some and maybe model them. That was a great idea Ms. Kowalski had as we were walking into the meeting. But they are compliant with stated federal guidelines, including OSHA. Thank you for asking.
Seinfeld, this is Nancy Castriovanni. The option 2 with the students with their desk guards, do they need to wear a mask when they're at their desk with the desk guard around them?
That's a really good question. We're going to discuss that again tomorrow with our district re-entry committee. The district doctor did say it's optimal, but I want to discuss whether it's absolutely required, because the way we're looking at it, if a student is sitting in the desk guard, not facing each other, facing forward, and sitting behind the desk guard, is that enough so that they wouldn't have to wear a mask throughout the day? The flip side is we may start the year requiring it, seeing how it goes, and then maybe ease back on the restriction, and it also would depend on the activity. So if students are working collaboratively, yes. But if they're sitting in rows, it's a question that I would really like clarification from our district physician at our meeting tomorrow. Because the guidance suggests, and I know Ms. Santos and I have parsed the words together, and I thank you for your study along with me, that the distancing or the guards, the desk guards, is the same.
Or the masks.
And no.
Well,
the distancing or the guards, and then you have to wear the mask when you cannot social distance. But if the mask if the guard equals the distance, is the if-then statement then that they would be able to take off their mask, at least for some parts of instruction. We know that they have to take it off for eating and for other parts of the day, and we know that there are some restrictions that some students may have. But again, from what we've seen so far, students are really getting very comfortable. It took them like a few minutes on their first day to get comfortable with it. So I think that if we do require masks, we won't have, our students will get very comfortable with it.
Dr.
Yeah.
Seinfeld.
Just for one thing, just for clarity, so social distancing is 6 feet or a barrier, right? Either one, that equals social distancing. So if you don't need a mask when you're social distancing, is the big question. But when you can't social distance, you will need a mask. So what we're saying is when when the kids are in 2 different places for synchronous learning, you're moving kids a lot more in that scenario, which would really be a con, as opposed to kids staying stagnant being a con, because if kids stay in a cohort and they're stagnant
With the desk guard.
or with a desk guard, there's a good argument that is a good model.
But then also, this is where it was, the masks, when these kids are passing in the hallway, the masks are used also as an equivalent of social distancing because they
can't social distance.
They can't use the barrier or
The big question is, does the mask, I keep saying that, does the guard equal the social distancing? The guidance suggests it does. Miss, you have
a question.
Oh, yes.
It's John McAvoy. Are we planning on making these stairwells and hallways one way when possible?
Yes, thank you for that question. There are numerous plans to have arrows and directions, as you might see in a supermarket.
And the stairwells are actually more important.
Thank you, yes.
So one way.
Yes, arrows and As a matter of fact, we just saw the way they did it at the Boys and Girls Club, one way up, one way down.
And Mr. Cronin?
Mr. Kowalski, just a question. I know I think it was brought up at one of our meetings. We're talking about masks. Is there any specific mask that's going to be required? N95, a cloth mask?
Cloth coverings is what's required as per the state guidance.
So it could be just like the one that were handed out at graduation?
That's
where
correct.
Students can make their own something?
Bandana is permitted.
Can it be the
Okay.
doctor's mask, the blue mask?
I believe so. If you ask me, they're cloth, not paper, but I would want to revisit that to make sure that those are in compliance. It just
I
says
think
cloth mask.
that was brought up at one of our meetings, and Dr. Strasberg, I don't know if he gave a definitive answer on it. If it was an N95, where you could use a cloth, or you could use the paper one like Ms. Kowalski has now. I think that's something we should look into, just to have it.
I'll add it to tomorrow afternoon's agenda so that we're clear on what his guidance is, but the state guidance says cloth mask or any type of face covering, gaiter,
Right.
etc.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Mr.
Yes.
Rosie?
So in option B, the dividers, the screen, are they affixed to the desk permanently? And will they be cleaned midday, once at the end of the day? I mean, there's only one child there. So when you say students are with their teacher all day, if they have a science special, art, that teacher is coming into the classroom and the child will not move from that classroom all day.
In every model, we're looking for teachers to move more and students to move less because of the requirement for cohorting. The dividers come with these clips that are affixed to all three sides to the desk. I have a video version of it if you would like to see it at some point. But the answer is yes, they're affixed. They would be cleaned, but when we get to discussing the high school, you'll see it's more complicated because of the movement. But the student would have his or her area, and that, yes, it would be cleaned, but it wouldn't need to be cleaned. No other child would ever use that space.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Kowalski?
You're welcome.
Yes,
Just to go along with Mr. Kowalski about the cleaning, maybe Mr. Cipriani can answer this one. Do we have enough people or supplies and support to clean not only the rooms now, but have them cleaning all these dividers? Do
We have, obviously, we have
custodians?
supplies. You know, we have to really assess our personnel. There might be some extensive overtime as a result of the additional cleaning that's going to be required.
Ms. Klaus, I have a
Yes,
question.
Mr. McAvoy.
Related question to Mr. McAvoy. Are we planning on, Mr. Cipriani, more security for traffic control is one thing, due to the more car traffic and what I'll call student and faculty movement control?
And as well as the use of tents outside.
Yes.
We are planning for all these things. And we do
Yes.
envision that, you know, there could be a lot more students being dropped off at the building. You know, in some instances, there could be lines of cars going, you know, for extensive lengths of real estate. And we need to have additional security there to
And we
manage
will be doing the daily temperature checking. I hope our other presenter is on his way. I don't know. Okay. And so that will create a backup at entrance, and of course we would want to protect our students at all times in terms of providing that temperature checking.
And will there be outdoor signage for where students will be standing? If you're going to address that tonight, I don't know.
There'll be signage in every part of the school that as needed, and that would be under the principal's purview, and of course Mr.
Yes.
Cipriani, as overseeing facilities, would work with them. So,
any other questions?
One
Mrs.
last
Rosie?
question. So the student leaves their home to get on a bus, leaves their parents' car, they will be in masks until they sit at their desk with the divider. Is that an accurate statement?
when 6 foot distancing cannot be maintained, yes. So yes, when they're in a hallway, they're passing other children until they are secured in their space, they would need to wear face coverings.
So entering the building, most likely.
Yes, buses for sure.
Scanning, it's masked until you get to your home base.
And even at the home base, we may require it for some parts of the day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any more questions before we have to make the decision on whether you want 6 foot distancing or the barrier option? Option A or B? No? Okay, so So why don't we go around and take a vote? Ms. Santos, would you like option A or option B?
I want option B for barriers, and my rationale is I think kids are moving less, maintaining a cohort, which is the most recommended way to conduct your back to school plan. So I actually think it has more advantages than the synchronous split in the classroom.
I do want to mention this is a really important part of the conversation, and I appreciate all your input. If everybody could speak up as best as you can so people who are listening in can hear. So I heard Mrs. Santos say option B.
Option B. And Mr. Jabosi?
Option B, for the same reasons as Mrs. Santos.
Mr. Cronin?
I would like option B. I think it's more of a typical day, not omitting anything from option A. So I think the students will benefit more of a regular full day with their specials.
Mr. Cronin went with option B, Dr. Seinfeld.
Thank you.
Mr. McAvoy?
Yeah, I would go with option B. It would maintain a more traditional day, and it would, what I'll call, formalize their placement within the barriers.
And Mr. McAvoy went with option
Thank you, Mr. McAvoy, for selecting option B. Mr. Cronin, Mr. Jabosi, Ms. Santos.
And Ms. Castro-Giovanni?
Option B.
Option B. And I'm also option B. I think I actually feel a little bit more protected with the barriers rather than just relying on social distancing. Okay.
Thank you. On to the high school. As a reminder, what I shared earlier, the majority of school districts are having a hybrid schedule for middle level, and the vast majority are having or planning to have a hybrid model for 9 through 12. In either of our, but of course not everybody has 7-12 in the same building. Whatever we're talking about in each of these, we're talking about our first phase. Again, I want to just reiterate that whatever we do, we will assess, we will of course consider what options, alterations may be needed. In both proposals, the 7th and 8th graders would be cohorted. That would limit student movement, and again, the students need to move less, the teachers would move to them. It would lower class size because some sections were high in the high 20s, and we would even that out across the 7th and 8th grade. The large ensembles would be split, music ensembles, into 4 groups, and would still experience a band and chorus experience, but it would be slightly modified. We would hope that if space is available, we would still be able to provide these music ensemble experiences, and there would be some modification to our music lesson rotation.
Dr. Seinfeld, would that music be in the new music wing? Like, is that the one time that they would move? Like, they wouldn't have music in the classroom?
They would have music in the music classroom, but as you probably saw in the guidance, we would have to, is that correct?
Yeah, the 7th and 8th grade doesn't keep them together all day like the elementary, but it dramatically limits the movement. So every group is a little bit different, but we try to get like 4 to 6 periods where they stay together.
Thank you, Dr. Mullen. So after a great deal of study, and I thank our administrators and supervisors who may be listening in for studying every aspect of this from every angle, including measuring every room, examining the master schedule, looking at how many students are in each period, looking at what our overflow space would be, we know that there are 2 options for you to consider. Option A is all students, again, 7th and 8th grade in every day. In option A, all students would be in grades 7 through 12 with desk guards and with masks because there'd be a lot of movement throughout the day. Students would attend classes each day with their assigned teacher. There would need to be some modifications for larger groups as per the guidance, including physical education and ensembles. Students would need to travel throughout the day with their Chromebooks, their instructional materials, including their books, their desk guards, and if this model continued into the cooler weather, possibly their coats, because we have been advised that having students use lockers and congregating by lockers is ill-advised. In this model, we would have full enrollment, full student density throughout our school, throughout the day. In option B, where we would be able to have greater distancing by bringing down the density of students in the school, students in grades 7 and 8 would attend every day, but students in grades 9 through 12 would attend on an alternating day schedule, with the goal that when students are in the building on alternate day, and remember the feedback was if we need a hybrid, people preferred alternate day to alternate week or to split schedule, and they would be with their own classroom teacher in most cases. We would also have to look at the legal requirements and be sure we're meeting them in terms of students in specific subgroups, as you may have read in the guidance, including students with special needs and students for whom English is not a first language. We may need some additional overages in this model to make it possible to have more students stay together on more days because of some of the sections being right now in the high 20s, and I would need to come back to you with those specifics if that's the option the board considers. As I mentioned, we are not advising the use of lockers, and it may be limited, and I didn't want that to come as a surprise to anybody. Our expectation for when a student is learning from home on an A-day, B-day schedule is that students would access the classroom learning via synchronous live engagement for some or all of every class period. To support the synchronous instruction, teachers would have the use and could have the use of asynchronous resources as they would in a normal classroom, and assign students to independent or collaborative group work to support the daily synchronous live engagement. Pros and cons to the two options. In option A, again, all students 7-12 in school daily with the barriers, all students would return to school. All grades. There would still be restricted movement, as we have in the elementary school for 7th and 8th grade, who would be cohorted, and their desk guards, if you will, would be similar to what we described at the elementary level. However, based on our high school student schedule and so many rich electives, AP classes, college level courses, etc., there's too much movement that we cannot cohort students in 9 through 12. So the only option we would have here is that students would carry their materials around and their desk guards around every day. They would have to adhere to that. They would have to carry them from classroom to classroom. We would have to have some rooming modifications to have as little movement as possible, and this option obviously does not fully reduce student density. In option B, which is, again, 7th and 8th graders in every day, 9 through 12 on alternate days, it does give us greater distancing. It does give us the ability to maintain our full master schedule. It brings down our student density, and that's both within the classes, arrival, dismissal, passing from one class to the other. It also mitigates the need for overflow rooms to hold larger groups of students. The cons, the students would attend on alternate days. I will share with you that parents with children in multiple grade levels have requested that if we go with this option, I just want you to know that it would be done according to student last name rather than grade level, and that is at the request of parents with children in more than one grade, but it also would help us with bringing down the density in classrooms, and it would also, if needed, help us with contact tracing as needed. There still would be in this model restricted movement for grades 7 and 8 because they would be in their cohort, in their classroom with their desk guard. So again, the two options here, A, all in with students carrying desk guards, which I will tell you there are some concerns about that, cleaning them, carrying them, high school kids getting silly, possibly using them to hit each other on the head with because they wouldn't be secured. Not that many of our students would, but in all seriousness, there's just a lot of room for error, but it is doable. And or B, where grades 7 and 8 are in every day, and 9 through 12 would be in on an 8-day B-day cycle.
Ms. Klaus, I have a question.
Yes, that's right.
It's John McAvoy. In a typical Oyster Bay high school classroom, if one could have such thing, how many students can fit safely with social distancing? And my follow-up question is, how many of our classes have that few students that they would just remain, they could just be in that classroom as they were?
Because of the age of the building, the rooms are a little bit smaller than if it had been a newer building. So our number was actually pretty small. It's different. There are also a lot of variations. It's not like every room is the same. So for example, in our science classrooms, we can fit larger numbers because we would have students sitting at some of the lab spaces, but some of the other rooms, the numbers were as small as 12. So we had to go room by room and look at, figure it out. So we tried to make sure that then the question becomes, do you put the biggest class in the science room, or do you keep the science class so that they can actually do science in the science room no matter what size it is? So those were all the things that we looked at.
So about how many classes of ours would fit safely in a classroom now?
I don't have that with me. I'm sorry.
Ms. Preston?
Yes.
Nancy Castro.
Average is about 14 students can fit in a classroom with 6 foot distancing.
How heavy are the desk barriers?
It's about 3¼ pounds.
3¼ pounds?
Yeah.
And they have a handle on them?
Yeah, there's a hole, you can put your hand through and hold it.
So when that student goes into their second period class, they just set it up on their desk. It's not necessarily pinned down or
Correct.
right. And then they take it with them, go to the next class, and they just set it up. But it's not necessarily secure the desk.
Well, there are clips that can be used to secure it, or it could just be placed on the desk.
Mr. Cronin?
Ms. Clausen, Ms. Cronin, just a question. On option A, we're going to carry the batteries, but option B, we're going to leave them in the classroom on the desk. But option B, 7th and 8th grade are going to stay as cohort together.
In either model.
What's that?
In either model, grades 7 and 8 would remain as a cohort.
But just
Now-
one correction, I think in option B for high school, they're not using barriers. If we go
6
to
foot
option
distance.
We would use
I mean, B, I'm confused now.
we would
Right,
use them in
right,
some
right.
spaces, but we
Yes,
right.
I think it's B that we're not using
We're
barriers.
not going to use the barrier test.
Because it's less people.
A is all in using desk guards. B is 7th and 8th grade cohort with desk guards,
Right.
9 through 12 alternate day.
All right, that's what I was trying to figure out, because what's the
Correct.
difference between the two? If students are moving, they're going to sit at somebody else's
Exactly.
desk, that someone else who sat there, is it going to be clean before they get there? So it's
I
not gonna
think
be
all
used.
the questions you're asking are answered by the fact that 91% of districts are planning who have submitted plans or proposed plans to do a hybrid model with grades 9 through 12.
And this is Lori Kowalski. I have a question about the seniors, who we know for graduation they all want to stay together. How many, and it seems like many of our seniors take these AP courses that have very few kids in it, whether it's AP Chem, AP Physics. Is there a way that we could keep our seniors, maybe, it's kind of like the 7th and 8th graders, all in on those days? Come in every day so they're together, rather than
I don't know that we could start the year with that, but that's something that we could work toward. And as we said, that this is all a phased approach. Right now, we would want to do we would want to bring down the student density, but I think that that's something we could definitely work toward.
Yeah, the reason I'm saying 12th grade too is because the student density in these AP classes is pretty low now, right? I mean, it's most of the AP classes, and I know a lot of these kids are taking those AP courses, so that means the other senior level courses are probably less dense as well. Whereas some of the younger grades, we have, you know, everybody maybe in an AP world class, right? But has a very large or pre-AP world class. So I'm just wondering if we could look at the density there and see whether you can get those kids into school more than just 14 kids.
We have looked at that, but one of the issues is that many of our AP classes are mixed grade levels. So it's not just 12th graders in most classes.
Yeah, but you're still like AP Chem. Last year had what, 20 kids?
Right.
You know, very few kids. Any other questions?
I have a question. So, for the 7th and 8th grade, I really love the idea that we're cohort. And I like the idea of the barriers for those grades. My only concern is, what Dr. Momo just raised, is that there's going to be a couple of classes where we start to take them out of those cohorts and we start to integrate students. Is there a way to prevent that? And can you give me an example of why we would have to do that?
Especially it gets more difficult in 8th grade because students have more choices. So if students have choices in both grades of language, they have choices about music, and they have choices about science, and there's division based on choices about math. So all of those things make their schedules very different. So we work to reorganize them to have as little movement as possible, but the only way to get additional movement is to limit choices, which we did not want to do.
Right. So what would it look like if, well, hopefully, and I don't even know if this is possible, but we would hope that all the kids taking Spanish or French could be cohorted, because we only have 2 languages in our school. But besides that, say, you have a kid that's taking honors or assignments, and, you know, one's in the accelerated math, and one chose to not take accelerated math. How are you're going to move the barriers with them in those scenarios? I mean, it's much less movement of barriers than it would be in high school, so I understand that. But the kids would take the barriers with them, right? And that's how we would satisfy the social distance.
And we would, of course, I mean, it's not ideal, but have wipes like these in every classroom, and we would spend time making sure everybody is aware of the protocols for cleaning, and students themselves and teachers would all have to be aware of the state requirements. That's one of the things we'll get to when we get to talking about professional development days. We would limit movement as much as we can and still deliver the instruction that the instructional program that our students, you know, richly deserve.
So we would cohort them for most of their day.
Correct. Exactly.
Like signed up to that point, this is Nancy Castriovanni. So I have 9th through 12th graders that are in every other day, but if I'm in, I'm moving from classroom to classroom. So the desk I sit at in my second period, somebody else sat there in the first period. So there'll be wipes available, and each student would wipe down your desk.
There would be wipes, and that's one of the reasons that in the bell schedule that we shared, it does provide for longer time in between periods because of the cleaning that would be required. But it would be fewer desks used in that model.
Right.
I'm just trying to think of it. So, I mean, I guess it sounds like your concern is that they're going to be carrying books, guards, and maybe a coat, right? Because we can't go to lockers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Has there been any thought of maybe reducing the number of textbooks these kids actually have to bring to school?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And also a place to put their coats, you know, rather than having a locker, because I think that issue seems like something we can get around.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's just something that we thought of, that as it gets cooler, we don't want students have to be tripping over themselves with these guards, etc. But listen, I'm presenting it as an option because I wanted you to have both options that the committee discussed, that we considered. We think they're the 2 best options. I'm telling you, and I'm telling everybody who's listening, none of this is perfect. None of this is going to please everybody. We want this miserable virus behind us, as to quote Ms. Lesher from the end of her speech at graduation. But the bottom line is, these are the 2 least bad options we could present to you, and we're happy to answer any other questions, but just know, let's hold hands together. This is not going to be perfect in any way, shape, or form.
So what does Lori Kowalski have? What are the numerous rooming modifications that would be needed? I'm not showing that if you do the barriers versus the hybrid.
So I think we're just trying to.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
Sure. So we need to go through and just make sure that everybody would fit in every class space. So if a class is typically in certain locations in the building, we might need to move that around for efficiency base. But our hope is that this would be much more of a typical experience. But we wanted to go through, group by group and see if we could put each class in a better location. We would try to optimize the spaces that we have. Traditionally, certain departments are all in one hallway. People are kind of in very typical departmental kind of layout around the building. So we'd have to we would be revisiting all of that to figure out how to best optimize the space so that if there are larger sections, because some of the classes are tight, and if the numbers are higher, we'd have to either look for better locations or do some overages to address them. So we have options, but we just wanted to put it out there as there might be in some different locations.
Thank you, Dr. Mulhall. With either of these options, we can say that is what we're going to start the year with and then assess and revisit. I mean, the nice thing about the technology that we have and the guards that we ordered, we can pivot. So just know that whatever we decide right now is the plan to start the year for the first phase of the return. And that goes for all grade levels.
No, I'm really just trying to understand these cons for option A, where you have all the students in with the barriers.
The biggest con is children having to walk around with the barriers, clean the barriers, and that much density in the hallways for passing, arrival, dismissal. You're not bringing down the density at all, and you can't cohort kids the way you can K through 8. That's what it's all about, movement and density. But I gave you both options because, they're both good and they both have their flaws.
Ms. Clausen.
Yes.
And this is Mr. McAvoy, what additional rooms are we considering using, just so folks know? Are we considering using the large conference room in the library?
Every room. Library, gymnasium, every auditorium, every part of the building. And every part of the building was measured in conjunction with looking at the master schedule, how many students, how many we could fit, and how many would have to be siphoned off to an alternate space.
So the auditorium, for example, how many classes can we have in the auditorium?
We could have several, but it's not optimal, especially with the seats that cannot be moved, and it would be difficult to have dividers.
Any other questions?
Also cafeterias and hallways.
Any other questions before you make your decision? Okay, let's go around for a vote now. For option A, which is all grades 7 through 12 students in school daily, less than 6 feet distancing with barriers. For option B, the hybrid approach where students in grades 7 and 8 in school every day, students in grades 9 through 12 attend school on alternate days. I'll start with you, Mrs. Castrogiovanni. Would you like option A or option B?
I think I'm leaning towards option B. I think it's important to help maintain the master schedule and schedules for the students. And I do like the option that, we're ordering enough barriers that for every student, that at some point we can pivot or maybe we reassess, after the semester's over in December. Option B.
Mr. McAvoy.
You said option B?
Yes.
I would prefer option A, with all students returning to school with barriers. I think we could train students to carry their desk guards effectively. I don't think that would be as big a problem as we think it is. I think they can get used to that. They're used to a lot of things now, and just the less disruption. So option A.
Mr. Cronin.
I'm leaning towards option B. The only reason they say carrying the barrier around, I think less movement, less students here at first. schedule. I've actually spoken to a couple other people from different districts, and that's what they're going to start out with. So I would go with option B.
Mr. Girosi.
I'm going to say option A. I'd like all kids returning to school full-time. I think it's just too much of a burden on working parents, and leaving kids home alone, I just don't think ends well. I'd like all kids back, option A.
Ms. Santos.
Well, I like option B for 1 month. And I would like to reevaluate after a month. And if the infection rate remains low and we can get these kids back with the barriers, I would prefer to get them back sooner rather than later. So I say start out slow, go with option B, and pivot to A a little faster.
Okay.
So I
We have an even number of board members right now.
Well, so.
I would like to reevaluate after a month.
Right.
That's a very good suggestion, Cindy.
Yes, I am leaning towards option A for 7th and 8th and 12th graders, and option B for everyone else, for the hybrid, for the 10th and 11th graders, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. I don't know how we, unless we,
Well, Ms. Klasky, what if Ms. Santos' suggestion we start with an option B? And also, I just think getting the kids back in and seeing how the, the dismissals and the arrivals are, and the backups at the door, and after a month we evaluate, and if we start bringing in, then we bring in the 12th grade. It doesn't, and then bring the 12th grade in and see how we're doing.
well, let me ask you, is any of the option B people, would they be willing to have the 12th graders in, all the 12th graders in?
I don't know.
Why would just the 12th graders, besides the AP and limited
Like
class?
it's their last year, and it's their last year in school, and they like to be together, just like our graduating class didn't want to be split apart. And I think if there's anybody who would give preference to them, I think we should really treat those 12th graders. Their last year, this last year that they get to see all their friends together. It's also the year that they take so many different courses, and a lot of those AP courses I know have very few kids in them.
And would we say, maybe this is Dr. Momo, would there be a year that you would say is a critical education year? I mean, I know they all are, but is there a year, I remember growing up, it was like 11th grade was like the key year of learning. Is there, do you have a preference?
I think juniors feel immense pressure because so much rides on what happens in that year. Seniors, the first half of the year, especially when they're working on their applications, and that they also feel a lot of pressure. And 9th and 10th graders are younger, and so it's a difficult. They would also benefit. So I think they all would benefit from being in the building, but for different reasons.
We also, consider childcare, that we want our youngest students to be in school as frequently as possible, which is why 7th and 8th grade we're recommending be in, and we feel like the older kids are, the more independent they could be, just like they would be in college. So,
Yes.
But when you start going, we're saying a 9th grader, right? So it's not really saying someone's in college is a stretch. You're talking about a 14-year-old, which I'm not sure I'm leaving my 14-year-old home alone every other day, all day. While some are independent, some get into trouble. If you have working parents, I think that leads to, is the academics going to be done on the alternate day, and what else are they doing during that time? Do parents don't feel comfortable leaving home and have to switch work schedules and so on?
I would just going back thinking about what Ms. Santos said about whatever we start with doing for a month, perhaps it would be better served to do it for a quarter, the first quarter, so that we really can get that under our belts before making a pivot. Just a thought, because by the time you have kids' schedules and familiarity with their classes and their routines, just a thought to give it a first quarter. But I don't feel like we have a consensus at this moment anyway.
So, well, the only reason I mentioned a month is because a lot of the colleges are starting online for the first few weeks, and then pivoting to the kids back in school.
Right.
So just my thought process was that, okay, but we lessen the density the first month, and then we see if we could start bringing, I like Mrs. Castroviani's idea, maybe you do bring the 12th graders back because they are the most mature and they should be able to handle the barriers in the hall and the changing of the classes. And then you see how it goes with one grade level. And then maybe you bring in the next grade level. So you slowly bring back the density as kids get used to the movement, used to the math, and then you start introducing the barriers maybe into the movement. And, you know, that was just my thought.
I was just thinking about the classes that we have that we do allow, and I don't know how well we'll be able to do that this year, to have kids try classes and then make changes by the first quarter, drop, add, etc. So we usually make changes by the end of the first quarter, through the first quarter.
But I'm also okay with that idea. You know, the question is though, will the virus get much worse as we move into winter, right? When we'll want to thin out the crowds maybe at that point, because you can look at, as you said, these colleges, they're having these kids go to school just Thanksgiving and then come home, right? So it's a real tough question.
Well, and I have one in college as well, so that's more traveling home for Thanksgiving to multiple cities around the United States, and then coming back and then leaving again. So I'm not sure that's daily in one town fear. I just
but they're saying that what they think is going to happen is they're going to have a certain resurgence of the virus as we get into the winter months, right? And like all schools and things like that.
Although, interestingly, I was on a call yesterday with Larry Eisenstein, and he's the director of the Nassau County Department of Health, and because of the distancing and the wearing of face coverings, the flu season in the southern hemisphere is at a record low. Really? So they're hoping that we will not have as bad a cold and flu season because of the precautions we're taking related to COVID-19.
That's why I like the idea of the temperature checkers out there.
Yes.
Okay, I think I will go for the hybrid approach as long as we reevaluate.
So
I would just ask if we could do it a little sooner than a quarter for the seniors if they really do want to do that. Like just to bring one class back and try.
So I just want to summarize that we have the majority of the Board of Education choosing B, but with the goal of bringing seniors back as soon as we can. Okay.
Is that accurate? Because that's not what this side of the room voted on.
Well, is that Ms. Castro-Giovanni, is that all right?
I have that Mr. McAvoy and Mr. Gerbosi were in favor of all in.
Mr. Cronin?
And that Ms. Castro-Giovanni, Mr. Cronin, Ms. Santos, and Ms. Kowalski were in favor of B, with the proviso that we revisit it with the goal of having seniors back in as soon as we can.
Yeah, I would go.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was good.
Okay. A few other items to discuss. As you know, this is a year like no other. There's a lot of required professional learning and training and health protocols that we will need to provide to our staff before students return. So as I included in the Board of Education letter, right now we have students returning to school on Wednesday, September 2nd. Teachers reporting on Tuesday, the 1st. We are permitted to have up to 4 superintendent's conference days. The requirement at the state education level is 180 days, which is 176 for kids, for students, and 4 superintendent's conference days. I am recommending that we add September 2nd and 3rd as superintendent's conference days to accommodate the need for all the additional training that is needed, and push our student start date to the day after Labor Day, Tuesday, September 8th. Any concerns about that?
Any concerns?
Thank you.
Dr. Seinfeld.
Yes, Mr. McAvoy.
There are a lot of YouTube tips you can watch on how to present via live streaming. Little things how to position it. Just little tricks. Are we sending that to our faculty now so that they can do something on their own?
We've done a great amount of training, and we'll continue to do so in terms of best practices for digital learning, and that could certainly be part of it. So.
You can do it now. You don't have to wait.
Absolutely. And we do have some in-service courses running during the summer and thank you for your approval of that. So I just wanted to mention the importance of our homeschool partnership at this point. You know that our students are going to need to wear face coverings at some times throughout the school day, certainly at arrival, dismissal, and on the bus. So it would be great if our community could support that by knowing that even our youngest learners who are doing great in terms of disabled learners who are in school doing great wearing the face coverings, but the more that we can have our families support and remind our kids of what will be expected when they return to school, the better. Right now, in terms of transportation, we know that it's the 6-foot distance or the mask, but I would like to ask families if they do plan to use the transportation, and so we could get a definitive number on that so we could plan our runs. Speaking of that, we do want to ask parents for their plans and their comfort level with returning to school in the fall so that we could determine which accommodations we may need to make in our return. Any concerns about that?
Any concerns?
So, next steps. Whoops. Oh, Mr. Rosato, I lost. Oh, there we go. Next steps, we have our re-entry meeting tomorrow afternoon to review our draft plan and to discuss a few other items. We do have a Board of Education meeting a week from tonight with any additional questions about our planning. I think we are pretty well set, but I'm sure we'll come up with some topics that we'll need to discuss. And I thank you for your attention and for your consideration, and I thank everybody listening or watching for joining us this evening. But before we close, I now turn this to Mr. Cipriani. I'm supposed to give this to you, but I'm not sure.
They're outside.
Yes, please.
And I'd like to say thank you, first of all, for all the work you put into this presentation. I know how much work Dr. Paul, Mr. Cipriani put into it, and Ms. Santos was helping you in some of these difficult decisions and the presentation. And I think you've come a long way in this last week.
Thank you. Well, it was very helpful having the guidance to come that last stretch, but thank you very much. I do appreciate those kind words. So as we discussed at our re-entry meeting, we will be doing temperature scanning. There will also be surveys for parents to complete. We can talk more about that next week, but we also did want a vendor to come and talk about an option for the temperature check. Mr. Rosato, do you know if Ms. Nolan is Mr. Cipriani finding?
Yes, he's coming right now.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll click for him. Yeah, so we don't have to wipe it.
Dr. Seinfeld.
Mr. Trevose.
We mentioned earlier about ordering tents, and I heard we discussed keeping the sides open so there would be structure and additional security around them. What was the purpose of the tent? Is it just an extra room when needed? Is there a focus that we'll be using it for?
The tents would be used for a number of items. First of all, for outdoor space for students during, let's say, lunch, recess, to be able to be outside even on an inclement weather day. The possibility of using them for physical education. The possibility of using them for the required mask breaks, to name a few.
Perfect, thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. Cipriani, I'll click for you so we don't have to disinfect. Do you want to just, you'll take it from here?
Yes, thank you. So, like I said, thank Seth for coming tonight from Metrologic.
Good evening.
Hello, how are you? I'd like to say that, we've been working collaboratively with them, and they are on the cutting edge of a lot of these new requirements that districts are under the gun to deliver on. We've talked about the thermal scanners when people come into the buildings. We've talked about the hand and wrist scanners, which Seth will talk about tonight. He also has an app regarding the questionnaire that people have to complete before they come into the building. And they have an app that links with, there's a link, there's an app, and the information from that app can go into a database. And part of what we're talking about is finding the most efficient ways to manage all that data and to be able to check that data before people come into the building. So it's a logistical question, and it's a difficult logistical question that Seth is working with us on. The other question is managing all the data of the temperature checks. Now, if we decide to check everyone's temperature when they come to the building, we need a protocol and we need some kind of a system that will make it easy for designated people to check those temperatures prior to people coming in the building. So with all these complicated tasks ahead of us, we've been working with Interlogic and they're helping us with solutions that are underway right now. We're in the process of putting them all together. So, Seth, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. As Michael said, we have been definitely working closely with you guys in general. You're not alone in the issues that you're facing. You know that, so I'm not telling you something you don't know. One of the things I'd like to just start in general with is what Michael just said. The planning aspect of the effect of taking temperature and the effect of understanding the information you're getting is really what we're finding from most districts is the most paramount and actually your toughest task. So I did bring tonight with me the risk scanner, which you can take a look at. We're kind of shifting maybe from some other things that you guys have heard about. You know, there's a lot of talk about thermal cameras, very expensive, and units that are really expensive. As a company, I mean, Lee Mandel built the company on partnerships in general, and that's what we're trying to continue. And in doing so, we don't believe the thermal cameras that are $1 zillion are really the right solution. We're looking at more of a singular approach where working with you guys to create that plan and work with the people in the district that matter and mean most in terms of making those decisions. And part of what we're thinking is, and we've spoken about this as recently as today, we'd like to think that the first level of your defense is the parents. So, and again, I am not an administrator, I don't claim to be one. I'm not a health professional, I don't claim to be one of those either. So I'm just speaking from experience in really discussing this over the last 4 months at length. Your first line of defense, we feel, is the parents. So that being said, we have engaged with the company. We believe we're their only distributor and dealer here on the island, called My Workplace. And they have created an app. They've had this app for ages, and it's been used in commercial workplaces for other functions. And basically what the app is in theory, all of your parents would download this app. Now that kind of removes the notion that a high school child might have a phone, kindergartner might not. Parents would download the app, and in the morning before school, you guys would set a time and give some form of a standard, meaning by X o'clock. And again, I'm not 100% familiar with what time your school day starts, but let's just say by 8 o'clock, every parent must have taken their child's temperature. Basically, they'll open the app. The app is going to ask them, who do you want to give information for? And their children would be listed. And this is just, they populate it. It's very simple, easy steps. They populate the child's information, so now they choose the child. Their first step is to say, where are you? Press a button on the app which will say the GPS coordinates of where they are, meaning their house. Understand anything I'm saying right now can be deleted or used, it's up to you guys. Second, a litany of questions, and we like to think it should be small. I think on our demo version it's showing 3 questions, which are basically what you guys have all been thinking. Do you have a temperature that exceeds 100.4 degrees? Have you been in contact with anyone that has corona or has been diagnosed? And 3, have you been tested or does anyone you live with have some form of an issue? Check, check, check. So those are boxes you can check off. The next thing they can do, take the temperature, and now think of this, you're in a house, a regular thermometer, that's fine. Mom takes the temperature, it says 98.7. On the app, she types in 98.7 and clicks save. She can take a picture of the actual thermometer. So it's very interesting, and I'll talk about that as it relates to the schools. But in addition to putting that information in, she can take a picture with her phone, the app is on it, take a picture of the thermometer showing 98.7, click save. That goes up to a portal that you guys or specific individuals will have access to. That portal will simply list the name of the children, which you're going to pre-populate. We're going to help you do that before everything gets set up. And when they've been scanned, it will show they've been scanned. So their name will show up as there. It's searchable. It isn't software that lives on a server. It is a browser-based application. So basically, you can search John Smith. It'll show you John Smith's reads. So in the morning, if you think of, and this is one of the heavy lifts for you guys and most districts, somebody internally needs to somehow manage this data. So once that parent has taken the temperature and clicked save, that information can be forwarded to whoever you want it to be forwarded to. And I mean that in a very private sense. So let's just say the school nurse for the elementary school gets any elementary child who has a fever, gets an email that that child just logged in with a fever. Okay, so there's an alert system where someone can be notified. 2, in this portal that I'm talking about, which is very simple to get to, it's on a regular browser, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, whatever you use, you will have a dashboard that's going to list all of your students. That can be parsed by elementary school, middle school, high school, the whole district is one, however you'd like us to do that. Anyone and everyone can have access to the information and access to as much or as little information as you want. Okay, now again, very important to understand. I'm saying things like it's capable of allowing a parent to engage a temperature and save it. If that's something you don't want as a district and you simply want 3 questions to be answered, great, no problem at all. Again, I'm not an administrator, I'm not a health official, I don't know where the mandate's going, and I don't think actually anyone here does either, which is part of our problem in being a partner for you. We're trying to solve problems that we're not 100% sure of what your actual needs are, right? So everything I'm saying, I'll reiterate that. You can chop anything out of it. In terms of adding things, we talked a lot recently about integration and integrating this device or this app. And one of the things that I spoke a lot about was, let's do things slowly. You have things that you need to accomplish, which are things like the children are all compliant and they don't have a fever, they can come to school. Fantastic. So the first step of all this, in our opinion, is the parents. And hopefully that works and it's great and you have everyone approved. Amazing. Now the child comes to school. I'm going to skip right over how they get to school, if they're on the bus, if they're in a car. Don't know that, and we're going to skip over that. Child gets to the school, and we have pretty much 2 different scenarios. The first is the K through probably 8, I'm going to say. 9 through 12 might be a little different, but K through 8, where we confirmed today that you guys as a district, all the kids have bus passes, which is really good and important, because they don't use anything to get into the school, per se. So they're a child, they're walking into school. The greeter doesn't necessarily know every single child by name or who they are. So the premise is, and again, understand, although this is deep in conversation, we believe this is probably the way it's going to work, where the child's going to walk into school. Unfortunately, you're faced with a very tough decision, which is the minimizing of that traffic of 50 children running into school at the same time. That, we believe, is going to be your hardest battle. Because it really, it can't happen. And I don't know how to explain that to you. You know your buildings better than I do by far. You know the traffic and the way it rolls. But you almost have to think of this as like, the best way to put it, like a metal detector society, right? Where everyone has to walk in almost single file. Basically, the thought pattern is that bus pass, we have the ability to take a sticker that can be put on that bus pass. The sticker is just about a permanent sticker. It won't rub off, it won't come off. And when the child walks up to the desk can have, think of like a scanning wand, if you're familiar with that the greeter would scan that, they would ask the child for the bus pass, not anything else, the bus pass, scan that tag which would identify the child, which is important because there's no other way for anyone to know that person's name. When they do that, that scanner is connected to a computer. We're working on some other things. Ideally, we'd like to have an iPad at the desk and an iPad to be fully part of this, but I'm not going to promise you that's happening. We're working on that integration. Theoretically, they're going to scan that tag. The child's name will come up. The greeter can then see, is that child, has their parent already given us the information we needed, or they haven't given us that information. Again, we know they see the name, they can search the name. If they haven't given information, the greeter now is going to use the device that I'm passing around, that temperature sensor for everyone. The child puts their wrist to that device. there's a red light and a green light on it, it will say red, bad, green, good. It will show the temperature. Now the greeter is saying, okay, we see what your temperature is. They enter the temperature, just like I just said on the app. They do the same thing. The child, if there's no temperature, great, no problem, go right ahead. This removes the need of, let's call it a logbook, right? A manual logbook. We talked about that a little bit, that there would be a logbook. And this completely removes the need to have anything manual, any kind of process where someone's writing something. Everyone coming in the building can be identified and logged based on that tag. Questions have come up about, in general, and again, I'm not a FERPA expert, that information of that child. Where are we in the world of what can be stored and what can't? I don't know. What I can tell you is we can make that tag for that child say anything we want. So if I scan Ben Barkis's tag, it could say number 56789. It doesn't have to say Ben Barkis. There can be ways around that we identify people numerically. That is a decision that you guys, I think, as a board and a district make, and we will follow your lead, but understand that there's definitely flexibility in terms of how someone is actually identified. The important part of this is they're not touching any device. They're not putting their head, let's say, to a device. There's no facial recognition involved. None of those things are at play. This device is simply going to be at a desk. You put your wrist right next to it. It reads a temperature, red light or green light. Assuming it's green, great, child goes ahead. The information is logged, everyone's happy. If it's red, first hurdle for you guys, what are we going to do? Is there going to be a nurse standing at every entrance? When the children are coming in, are you going to have separate areas for children to be quarantined? This is stuff we absolutely will help you with, but by no means are experts in, right? We'll help you to help the flow of traffic move. We'll help you to understand how quickly this process will be. Truthfully, the second that is plugged in, you literally put your wrist to it and it will immediately read a temperature. There's no delay. The second you enter information in the app, it will immediately upload to that dashboard. So time is something that's very quick. This is a quick process. The one thing I'll say about this device is we have chosen to, this is the prototype of the device that's actually coming 100%, has a little bit nicer of an LED readout. Again, for me, this gets you through your compliance. It's not $1 million, and it serves its purpose and works well, which is what we like. We've been benching these devices for almost 4 months now, and we've gotten literally every one of them, from expensive to inexpensive. And we've landed on this one because we like the form factor. It's very simple. It is what it is, and it gets you through what you need. There are other things that we've discussed that we chose not really to push forward to you guys, which are things like a standing stainless steel kiosk with a beautiful touchscreen on it. Expensive and not necessarily what you need specifically down to K-6. Definitely not something you need. It's available, they're out there, but we've really tailored this solution, and working in tandem with my workplace has been a fantastic experience. We are definitely one of their biggest fans, and on top of that, we're working closely with not only their CEO, but their top development team. So we are getting through to them in terms of feedback from districts as we speak to them. I will tell you, I don't see much, and maybe the best thing that I can do after this meeting is kind of send a follow-up with some screenshots maybe of these screens that we're talking about. But the truth is, I think the other thing we really like about this entire platform and process is that it's all basically browser-based. It doesn't rely on servers, which is important. We can get the documentation on the storage of the data and where it is. We can limit what's stored. You can say at the end of every day we want it gone. You can say we want to keep that data for 30 days. It's up to you guys and up to regulations. Again, not claiming to be an expert. Theoretically, I think you're faced with a couple of very easy wins, in my opinion, which is get the parents to care and be responsible and take their temperatures of their children. And we've said to everyone we've spoken to, that is your hardest challenge, but at the same time, it's really what will make the entire engine go. Because we know that there are many variables between, at 8 a.m., we were just talking about this outside in the lobby, that, you know, I'm a parent. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I'm not happy to admit, but there have been times where I've had a very busy day and my wife has too, and my child has a 99 fever. Give them 2 Tylenol and let them go to school, and if you don't feel good, go to the nurse. Unfortunately, today, that's going to be a problem for you guys because at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone's already in the building and the Tylenol's wearing off. And I'm not giving parents or people ideas, but it's a reality. And so one of the things we've discussed in general is the beginning of the day challenge, we believe is conquerable, 100%. You know, I think you'll have a bunch of parents that are going to get on board and believe in this, and they should, and they'll kind of bring everyone along with them. The real problem becomes in the middle of the day, and in how you're going to react to temperature taking and all these things in the middle of the day. One of the things about this solution, again, it's nimble. That device, that scanner, can be unplugged from wherever it is and literally just plugged in. So I'm going to make a crazy statement, but let's just say you had 10 of these in a school in a room. At noon, it could be someone's job to go room to room, and the teacher has to take temperature of their kids for 10 minutes. And that's just an idea, but with this device, that's possible. I mean, you're feeling it in your hands, it doesn't weigh anything, it plugs into a wall, and it's very simple. The teacher then could open up an app, like we're talking about, and log every one of those children their temperatures. Time consuming, will take away from education time, absolutely, but that is a process that's definitely possible with this solution. Again, because it's mobile, it's not limited to only being at the front main entries of your schools. That being the case, I'm not 100% sure about where your compliance issues lie in. You know, do they last 8 hours a day, all day long? I'm not sure, and I hate that I'm saying I'm not sure, but that's the truth. And I don't know that anyone's sure. We do know that we think the solution we're putting forward is one that's simple, easy, technology forward, and really portable, which was a really big thing for us. Is one of the other reasons we really like this device for the districts is it's easily moved. It doesn't have to be mounted on a wall. It doesn't weigh 50 pounds. You can move it wherever you need to. And that really was an important factor for us because there will come a time where you have a nighttime event in an auditorium and that device can't just be at the main entry. Maybe you want to have it at the auditorium entry. You can. That day, you're going to bring it right over to the auditorium entry and it's going to work and there's no issues. And that app can run on an iPad, can run on a smartphone, whether it's a teacher, an administrator who has one, all of that will work. So I think, I mean, without talking too much about things that I don't think are as relevant, I think I'd like to leave you on that, and certainly am available to answer any questions, for sure.
Yes, I have a question. This is Lori Kowalski. In a perfect world, I would love to see is that we'd have, let's say, 7 or 8 of these lining our front entrance, and a child scans his ID. It would be tied immediately to the app. The app is red. They immediately scan the hand and they go in. Or just scan the ID, scan your hand, and move in. If it turns green, you get to go. If it turns red, it doesn't. But that data is collected every single day with the ID scan and the temperature, so that we have a logbook, which I think would meet those requirements. Now, what are you thinking about doing some type of development, attaching the ID scan to the temperature check and storing that, so that we would, because we can rely on the parents, which I think they should also take their temperature, so we avoid kids who are sick going onto the buses. But as a second check, that we can collect that data with an ID scan, a temperature check, and go in.
Yes, I mean, we're totally there. I think one of the reasons that we've slowed that process of integration is really more because of the K to 6, K to 7, K to 8, that world where the IDs and the children having those IDs and doing things on their own without supervision of some sort for us is, and from the feedback we've gotten, is a little weary. So if you can imagine, and much better than I can, if you can imagine the 50 children walking in the building are all kindergarten, first and second graders, telling them just to go up to the wall and scan the ID becomes something that needs to be supervised. In our opinion, again, I'm not in your world, I'm on the outside, but so we felt that although it is 100% possible to do what you want to do, and we can have 7 of these on the walls, and every child can put their wrist up, and if a red light goes off, there still would need to be one person watching, right, to be able to see.
And we'd still need that because the other option of having a nurse go in and take people's temperatures and chasing down everybody
Yeah.
who hasn't had it, I mean, that still requires manpower versus just an aide at the door, which is typically watching kids going in and out anyway, making sure they're safe, to watch that or something. So I'm just wondering if you can develop that technology.
We can. I think the other thing also is, that's something in our discussions has always been discussed about, like in the high schools. It's more feasible when you have responsible older children that you can really give direction to and that you're not worried about supervising. I'm just thinking about the children in kindergarten and first grade, walk in a straight line, hold hands when you're walking through the hallway. All those things are reasonable, right? I think with the older kids, them doing something that's much more self-sufficient can make sense, and we can work with it, where if they don't have the right if they're flagged for a high temperature, that door maybe won't open, which is I think kind of where you're going. We can go there. It's just, I don't think everything's there yet, and I'm not willing to tell you guys that's 100% perfect. There are definitely products touting that. My fear is that the data that's compiled, there's too many regulations it breaks. And again, not being an expert on that, but knowing that you took my temperature, you stored my temperature, you opened the door, my name is Seth, and I'm in the building. If that works, yes, and we're looking to develop it now anyway, because I think the whole problem for us is this a temporary situation or is it permanent? Are we looking at an industry where for the next 25 years, this is going to be products and an increase in integration, or are we looking at a very small sample of a year and a half of the market being flooded with expensive type devices? Truthfully, yes, we're definitely working on integration. We can definitely mount multiple of these on a wall without issue. The question just becomes, in terms of the data collection and the understanding of that woman has a fever, what is the effect now? Is someone going to run over to there and find her and say, oh, hold on, you need to go over to that corner room or wherever you need to go? And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, where you won't even be able to get into a door maybe if you have a fever. But we've been trying to listen to the districts and understand the reality of, for example, we have a district that said we no longer have a single main entry. We've created 7 main entries now to split traffic so that we have a much better opportunity. We've heard ideas about letters A through D can go in through this entrance, E through J go here. I mean, there's a lot of opinions out there. I think the traffic is your biggest hurdle. It's the one reason that we're really not selling, although we have sold to one district, the thermal cameras that are super expensive. They're meant for high traffic. The problem is, if there's 30 people in a room and one of them has a fever, who's running after that person? How are they finding them? How are they grabbing them? What's the process? So we've been hammering down a lot more that almost very aggravating and difficult for you guys, single file entry to an extent and very controlled entry. It might mean that you have to have kids coming to school earlier or create new entryways for different children. But I think that's all opinions that as you guys get deeper into that rabbit hole, we can work with you and figure out the best solution that works.
Okay, so
Sure.
I have a question. Let's walk back what you said. So somebody has a wand, like I'm at a stadium with a ticket and they're taking the wand to see my bus pass with me. How many seconds between the time that they wand my bus pass and then they check it on a system are we talking about? Like how quick is the
Roughly 1 to 3.
1 to 3.
One
So
to
now
three.
what does the person see on the other screen? Do they see green or red? And is it that quick?
So remember, the bus pass is just saying, I am Seth Farkas, right? That's all that wand is doing.
Well, no, I know, but then
Now the
somebody's
wrist.
got to look at a screen, like you're wanding someone and now you gotta look at the computer, right? So what is that computer doing? Is it flashing red or green? Is it that quick?
So the only thing the wand is doing is identifying the child, right? Because Seth Farkas is in 2nd grade and there's no way to know that it's really Seth Farkas.
Right, but it's gotta be bringing something up on the computer to say
Yeah.
the person.
Sure, that tag is associated with their information, and it'll bring it up on that dashboard. It'll show you this is Seth Farkas. That screen will now show you the questions. Did he answer them first off, right? You'll know that automatically, where they answered. If they weren't answered, they could be asked. Now again, we can't assume that a kindergartner is going to be asked questions like, that need to be asked, but maybe we can. And think of that screen as, when I'm saying 1 to 3 seconds, it's when I scan that badge, poof, I'm getting a screen pop, I'm seeing the kid's name, I'm seeing if they were already filled out the questionnaire or not, and if they didn't, I'm able to do that there at that point. Second, when they now use their wrist to take their temperature, I'm logging the temperature right there on the screen. I would guess the first week or 2 weeks, don't hold me to this, but I would say that by the time you're in full swing, the whole process is probably somewhere between 30 and 40 seconds a child, if I had to guess.
How does that
So why
compare
do we
to?
do temperature? Like it seems so much faster just to do everyone's temperature. It goes so much faster.
You
That's what I was
can.
thinking, using the handheld.
Yes.
So
100%.
you totally can. So remember, that device that you're taking the temperature of is perfect. No problem. It's going to take the temperature. The only thing is, those wands traditionally, like the thermometers, you need to be super close. Like genuinely, I need to be close to you.
And you know, we got to keep those people behind glass.
Yes.
According to the guidelines.
Which is why we're thinking the stickers on the bus passes, you could think of 5 different things you could do with that. The child can put it in a slot, they can put it on top of a desk and not touch anyone. It gets scanned, it says this is who the child is, and now the child does their wrist, takes the temperature. All that has to happen is the information gets logged, what their temperature was, and they go. This, and now remember, you have to, in some respects, think about the alternative being that logbook. I visited a company, a commercial company, here on Long Island, literally 3 weeks ago. We walked in, the woman at the desk had a wand, stood probably 1.5 feet from us, took our temperature, then asked us to fill our names out, the date, my phone number, and then what the temperature was. It probably took about 1.5 minutes. So in our minds, and there was 7 of us that went to this meeting. This 30 to 45 seconds that I'm talking about, I don't think there's a quick solution, which is the problem. Because even if you just scan the temperature, like if I had one of these thermometer wands in my hand, and I went to you and took your temperature, and took your temperature, and took your temperature, all I would know is if you had a temperature or not. I wouldn't know any other information about you. And from what we're being told, theoretically through district to district, you need to know that there's compliance involved. You need to know that that child has already said, I don't have a fever and I haven't been in contact. So I think the back-end data is really what might be a little bit more time-consuming. That said, I know that I live in Comac. They're using some form of a portal. I have no idea, even as a resident and a parent, I don't know what the back end of that looks like. I know that with this, at least, there's a lot of flexibility for you guys. And the key for us really was to use a product and products that are flexible and easy to customize. Because again, we don't want you to be in a position where you're buying something that you're literally stuck with. And you're like, we spent so much money and we're stuck. With this, what we're thinking is, and really not a theory, is that in the beginning, it will be a hurdle. It will be very difficult, like most things that you implement district-wide. I think within a week to 2 weeks, everything will be on autopilot and things will be very easy. Now look, maybe I'm a pie-in-the-sky thinker, that's possible. A lot of this depends on what is the effect of, really our biggest concern as a company is what happens when someone has a fever. Right? Because we can do all we can and help you guys and partner with you to make sure that you're getting these readings and storing the data you need to. But what's going to happen when a child has a fever? Because that's going to be that straw that maybe kind of crumbles down. If a child has a fever and it's not dealt with immediately, and now you have 3 children behind them, and they see that this child has a fever and uproar, and we just don't know the social aspect of what's happening. I can tell you that there was a piece that we did on Fox News using thermal imaging, and it's great technology, but there are also other aspects about it that really we were taken to task on, and not us personally, but in general as an industry, where thermal imaging shows things it's not supposed to show. Best put, and it's a problem. And specifically, when you talk about children that have medical devices that nobody in the school has any idea about, and now there's another child right behind them, and all of a sudden they see an image and they see things. So there was a lot of topics that we discussed with districts, with other people in the industry, and with manufacturers. And we really found like this methodology of being able to allow the parents to be the first layer, and then at the schools, you already have the information from the parents, and now the children come in, it's a quick scan to see who they are, it's a quick temperature with a wrist, no big deal, which is an easy, simple readout, red light, green light, It may be that green light, walk to the right, red light, walk to the left. But at the end of the day, this whole process, we're believing 30 to 45 seconds, 30 to 40 seconds, you have every child coming in the building with their temperature logged if you want it, and knowing that they were compliant and haven't been exposed to anyone, don't live with anyone that has the virus, and so forth and so on. So, look, I would be the first to tell you, I don't believe there's a perfect solution or scenario or a right one even, right? I think there's a lot of opinions. I can only tell you that, at least for the last 4 months, in a very stringent way, we have knocked down and dragged out every single product we could, and we kind of landed here. Again, I think our hope is that, not being like trinket salespeople, we're more involved in wanting to be your partner, for lack of a really cheesy sense. We want to be your partner. We want to know you to know that you're buying a device, but really you're buying the company that's selling it to you. You're buying our support and our assistance with you, right? And working. We know that this is not going to be something that you set up day one, and 50 days later it's going to be the same thing. I don't believe that's going to happen, because I think you guys are going to have to adapt and move on the fly as traffic goes, as God forbid the virus goes. So I think we know that we're going to have to pivot and move with you, which is kind of, I think, why we're here and why we've chosen this type of a solution. It's very flexible and easy to maneuver.
Do you have the cost of the system?
Yeah, I think the proposal is in. The devices themselves, the apps, so start there because that's the easy part.
So I see the IRS and forehead subtotal, it's about 665.
6,500 all in, right?
And then the recurring is 300 per device?
300 per building.
Per building. So
Right,
if we
for
buy
the
100
wrist
devices
scanners.
per building.
Right, and I think it
Like
was
the
4
6,500, is that for the apps?
in the building, so it was 4 in the building.
665 for the scanner itself, right?
The scanner was the 4 scanners in the 3 buildings, and then 1 scanner for admin. And those were $200 a piece, right? And then the app is $2.04 per user. So we kind of estimate that you take all of your students and then you take your full-time staff, and I think there's an estimated number there, right?
Yeah.
The total amount of people?
Yeah, so you figure about 2,000 altogether.
Right. 2,000 people altogether times $2.04 a year for the app. And then on top of that, the only other cost is there's some setup fees. I believe there's a line item for a setup fee, and the recurring revenue on the wrist sensors is just about service. One thing I can tell you is, with the service of these units, if it breaks, we're going to walk in with a new one. We're not going to try to fix it. You're not going to be down. You're going to say at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it doesn't work. You're going to call our support or send an email to support. We're literally 45 minutes away. Hopefully by the end of that day, if not by the next morning, we're going to get you a new unit and you'll be fine. So that's part of the reason for the support agreement. On the My Workplace, there's also a support for an annual fee where once a year, we'll come in and retool the system with you. We believe there'll be modifications necessary. It might be or might not be something you guys want to do. It's a fee that's there on an annual basis. Again, not ramming anything down your throats. If you believe that makes sense, great. If not, we're still your partner. It just means that there would be a time and material charge for us to come in and help you retool the system. And by retooling in the app system, I really mean looking at the database with you, changing the way procedures are, maybe changing the way data flows, and changing who's getting emails, that type of stuff. That I think really probably will be on an annual basis as there's turnover and as you've shifted, what you want to use this for. The other thing that is really important for you guys to understand about the app, specifically, today, we're talking about it in the sense of compliance, right? Just understanding compliance. This, truthfully, for me, is more of a gateway for you guys to, if it's not compliance, you'll understand quickly that your maintenance team can use this app in a different way. And you can have them going room to room saying, is this room clean, is that room clean? A whole separate entity. Same idea, they have an app, they go to that room, there's a task, they check the task off, the room is clean. We're not going to talk about that in depth, but just so you know, again, we've kind of partnered with this company because it's not a single source, it's not God, what did we do? And now we don't need this anymore and we're stuck. So everything's on an annual basis. You're not locked into anything for more than a year. I think we all believe this will at least last a year. And again, look, I think on the price side, there are other options. And I can give you examples. Those kiosks that I mentioned, they're $2,000 a piece. For you guys, that would be $24,000 to have 4 of those. For a 12. That would be, $24,000 plus $2,000 for the admin building. That's $26,000 to have a device that basically, truthfully, does the same thing. And to the superintendent's credit and to the board's credit, I think you guys in the diligence you're doing now is going miles. I mean, you're way ahead of the curve, in my opinion. Some districts are not even having these discussions yet, believe it or not. And I think the amount of diligence, and I can tell you personally that the amount of discussions that Michael and our company have had have been tremendous. And it's a credit to all of you guys, and specifically the superintendent, where you've really made a move with this matters. And I think it's very important that we keep in mind that the solutions themselves, the pricing kind of is what it is, and we don't feel like we're gouging anyone, which was important to us as well. I know Lee Mandel, the CEO, felt pretty strongly about not wanting to go to market with products that were thousands of dollars that we didn't know 100% if they worked. Let's face it, industry-wide in the security industry, nobody is 100% sure that anything, anywhere, is 100% working. So we've done the best we could, and I'm being completely honest as I can be. We've done the best we could in banging these products up and really drilling them as hard as we could to try to break them. And this was the result of that. And I think, again, in the underlying tone is, we chose basically a software solution over a hardware solution for multiple reasons. The hardware is necessary, that the risk sensor is necessary. But the engine that moves all of this is the software, and software is very nimble and very easy to use and easy to track the data that we think you guys need for compliance.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, Ms. Foster, to Mr. Cipriani, for this whole operation, how much with the app and how many of these devices would we be
I'm
purchasing?
estimating initial startup of under 10,000 and then recurring of under 5,000, most likely.
The startup would be 10,000.
10,000 or less based
Yeah.
on the numbers that we're looking
How many devices would we?
something like
4, 8, 12, 13 of the risk scanners.
There could be more.
What's that? It could be more. I mean, it could be as many as you want, truthfully. But I think we based the initial proposal on 13. And the apps, the number was 1,155. No, 2,000.
2,000 employees and
Right. The 2,000 students was the
Mr.
app.
Cronin's about $200 a device.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you just mentioned something about a $300 recurring fee. What was that?
There's a recurring fee.
So the recurring
just to
fee
have
is
the
the
system
service
in
of
place.
that device. So a couple of things. One is, obviously, if the device only costs $200, why are we charging you $300 a year for recurring revenue, right, and service? The main function of that is, A, we're aware and we believe you're aware that there's going to be phone calls about it working and not working. So we're enabling you to use our support, let's say. B is really direct replacement, which means every one of these that we're selling, we're basically stocking. So in the event that it goes down, you have really what's a 24-hour turnaround of us being able to come the next morning with a new one, which we believe is really important. We can't do that for free, because then we'd be double, triple, quadruple stocking everything we're doing. And on the service side, we came up with that number at $25 a month per building. If you think of it that way, there's 4 in each building. So ultimately, you're spending $800 on those 4 devices. You're paying $300 a year to ensure that those devices are going to work and we're going to service them.
$300 each device? Or
Pardon?
$300 each device?
$300 per building.
Okay.
Yeah, no, $300 per device would be crazy, right? $300 per building. And we use, actually, believe it or not, here, we use 4 as the benchmark. So if you had more than 4 in a building, it would be another $300, because 4 is just that number that actually makes fiscal sense for us. Again, those numbers genuinely can be discussed, but the $300 a year per building is based on your 4 risk scanners and direct replacement happening. And again, the little bit of support that would be necessary, a phone call from a greeter that says, hey, I'm using the device and it's showing me Celsius. Like, we know the questions that are going to happen. Somebody touched a button.
Are they
How does that
unlimited
support
replacements?
come?
Pardon?
How quickly would the support come if there was an issue? How would the support?
So, twofold. What we would do for sure is every greeter desk would have our support number at the desk and be able to call into the office. Most of these questions are very easy answers. Like I'm saying, like, for some reason it's reading Celsius. Okay, we'll walk you through the 3 steps. Press this button and that one. If a unit was actually broken for some reason, you would either call or email support. They put a ticket in. Again, we'd have them on the shelf. Next day, we'd come by and stop by and bring it. There's no issue with that happening at all because, again, this isn't a device that we're coming in, running wires to. Again, very important for us in the device we chose, it plugs into a wall. And wherever it was mounted before, the old one comes off and the new one goes on and we plug it into the wall. So we do believe next day turnaround is definitely, with that $300 agreement, would happen.
And that's unlimited replacements, so we can replace
Yeah, again, if we were a silly company, we'd be installing a product that we thought would break 50 times in the year, right? So yes, unlimited replacements. The only thing that wouldn't be covered is typical vandalism, acts of God. So your typical things that we can't cover the device if somebody walked up to it with a hammer and broke it, right? But malfunctions, anything that goes wrong with it, I think there's a discussion point if somebody was looking at it and it fell down off the wall, sure. But I think we just will steer clear of somebody threw a bucket of water on it, somebody hit it with a hammer. Direct vandalism wouldn't be covered.
So 30 to 40 seconds is not optimal. I gotta be honest with you.
Okay.
So have you thought about a system that would flash red when something wasn't complete? Like 3 questions and the temperature weren't complete. Like it would flash red. Otherwise it flashes green. It's just gotta be a little faster. I don't know if you're there yet with the technology, but I can't imagine that these kids scanning these bus passes and someone reading it on a screen, and then the next thing. With the amount of traffic we have in our buildings, it's going to build up the safety concern with too long a line outside.
Understood completely.
It's definitely a bottleneck issue.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the issues that we're faced with any of the technologies. Believe it or not, it's really not so much the technology and the speed of the technology as it is the ability to capture the data. Now again, and I think Michael, we've spoken about this, where if we were in a perfect world, like talk about the commercial business space, they're using facial recognition. Every person has a face, they look at a tablet, it shows their face, they walk in. It's very simple. If there's a red light, they can't go in. If there's a green light, they can. Easy. Here, and in schools in general, we don't have the ability, I don't think. Now remember, when we're saying 30 to 40 seconds, I believe that's for realistic time frame of the younger K through 8, K through 9, that even younger maybe. Do I think that the high schools it'll take 30 seconds? No. I think at the high schools, a lot of those kids are going to have the app on their own phone. If you allow that, the kids will sign in on their own phone. They know what to do with the badge. They'll put it right to the scanner. I think it'll be a much quicker process. I think as with anything else, if you did a fire drill for your high school students compared to your first graders, there's probably a big difference in time in getting out of the building and things like that. I'm speculating, but
those are our most vulnerable.
Of course, totally.
Right. So how many scanners are you suggesting per entry?
The wrist scanners, you mean, or the?
Not the wrist.
So again, listen, this is completely a district decision and a board decision on how you believe traffic is going to flow. For me, every one of those scanners needs a person. So how many people do you plan on having at the entrances of these buildings to allow people in? Remember, as long as there's a computer at a desk that's showing that dashboard and a person to be able to do something, you can have as many as you'd like. Without the knowledge genuinely, and this isn't your fault at all, but we don't have the knowledge, I don't think, and you don't have the knowledge as to what are you going to do at your entrances in terms of your own manpower. I think that's something we can pivot with you, and this type of solution, again, easy to do that. I think timing, I could lie to you and tell you 10 seconds, no problem, we're going to run it and everything will be great. I really genuinely, heart of hearts, believe 30 to 40 is probably right on. As you get into this and you're doing it for a longer period of time, will that shrink? I think so. I think when the greeter gets more in tune to what they're doing, look, we can speak about the reality. If there's a greeter that's at a desk and he's a man who isn't super computer savvy and it takes him a long time to type, we can envision that it might take even a little bit longer. But your alternative is a paper log of someone signing something and trying to read it. You know, we thought about, a lot of the industry discussion has been about, what do you do now? If none of this existed, what would you do? And the answer has always come back to, there would be a pad and a pen, and they'd have to ask someone who they were and just believe them by saying, I'm Joey, okay. And then they'd have to write, and it's at least 30 to 40 seconds.
See, I think if we had it tied to the ID badge, I mean, and I know you're saying kindergartens, young kids can't do that, but most of these kids are pretty savvy. They just have to swipe their ID, put their wrist on a thermometer and walk in. It's a lot easier than having that person sitting there looking up whether the app was done or not done and what you have to take your temperature. So I'm not sure about that. But I think that you've sent Mr. Cipriani all this information?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like I said, the only thing I think we don't have is the screenshots of the dashboard of what the actual greeter would see.
I think you're going to compile some additional information.
Like more of the screen, the look and feel, let's say, of what the dashboard itself looks like. Yes.
Okay, so maybe send that to Mr. Cipriani.
Certainly.
And we'll all take a look at that and then come to a decision. But thank you very much for coming and presenting to us.
Thank you.
Certainly. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Wish you guys all well and health and
Stay well.
all that. Thanks so much. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Seth.
Thank you.
Seth?
Yeah.
One last question?
Yeah.
Generally, what would be the lead time for implementation?
I'm sorry?
What would be the approximate lead time?
From PO to completion, so I would say one thing. There is a planning phase that we would definitely have with you guys. The devices themselves are probably something like 7 to 14 days away. That's funny, I would have thought that completely. These devices are probably 7 to 14 days away. The delivery of them is literally no big deal, it's a day. The real heavy lift here is the programming and working on the program with you guys. Now, what I would tell you is, I don't know how the district is going to work this. Will one person be manning, owning this program itself? Possibly. If so, that one person will work with our director of technology and make everything go. If it's a committee, so be it. But that's the heavier lift is the data entry part of this. The devices themselves, not a big issue. Like I said, I believe it's 7 to 14 days. So I would say that if we were to receive a PO on Monday, the likelihood is we'd be able to install these 2 Mondays following, and in the 2 weeks that lead up to that, we would be on a hardcore push with whoever it is in the district that we would need to be working with to compile the data and make it go. And we'll help you with documentation that you can send out to the residents and the parents and all of that as well.
Thank
Okay,
you
thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you. All my cards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it. Thanks again, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Simon, is there anything else that's on our workshop agenda?
Well, nothing else. I did want to share that we also have another option, which is we do have 20 or more no-touch thermometers already that we already purchased in anticipation of doing the temperature check.
And how are you monitoring staff?
We would have to follow the regulations for that as well, but I think that there are some pros and cons to the flexibility of the handheld.
Ms. Kowalski,
Yes.
I know Ms. Santos and I and Mr. Jambosi are on the committee. Now, just reading it, but it says you have to take a temperature every day. But it says for staff and faculty, you have to do the questionnaire every day.
Correct.
And students is periodic. So maybe he just went through this whole thing about scanning all the students every single day to get their information. But right here in the thing it says you don't have to.
Correct.
I have a silly question. Why are we collecting the data?
That's what I'm saying.
It just
It's
seems like a
right.
giant waste of time. He mentioned the app is the first line of defense. I couldn't think of it more than a false sense of security. I don't understand. I know myself, we're lucky to get out of the house in time having breakfast. The idea of taking everyone's temperature and going into the app and answering these questions, I know he said there's GPS coordinates, but I'm probably going to be doing that while I'm driving them to Vernon. I mean, and I don't think I'm nearly in the minority. So I believe if we're worried about collecting data, it's an absolute colossal waste of time, and it means nothing. My son is in camp right now, basketball camp. They roll 200 kids into the gym in under 5 minutes. 4 guys, scanning your head, you're good, you're not. You're good, go, 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 go. You don't need to collect names. You know where to go. We know where you go in the room. You know where your classroom is, go. If you don't, you go to some waiting area and you have to define what that is. But I'm not sure. I agree with you, Marianne. I mean, Mrs. Santos, sorry. It is not going to be 40 seconds. It is going to be a heck of a lot longer than that, especially in younger age. Finding your kids, you didn't answer the questions, answering you the questions, not speaking English, what do you mean, have I been around anyone? To me, this is a colossal waste of time.
I have to say that we did a survey with some of my colleagues, and many of them are just doing the questionnaire, and they're not taking temperatures of the buildings. Many are not.
But that's not keeping our kids safe. That's just covering our requirements through all. If the goal is to keep our kids safe, keep the whole building safe, faculty, everyone, we should be scanning everyone's temperature on the way in the building so we know factually. At that time, I understand there's the whole, I can give you Advil or Tylenol, and we're never going to be perfect, but that's going to be a very small snapshot as opposed to parents either not doing the app, lying on the app, or not taking their temperature. Scan everyone at the door, and we know yes or no.
And still encourage parents. I mean, the guidance is clear. Schools should encourage staff to complete required screenings prior to arrival at school and encourage parents, guardians to screen their child before sending them to school. Screening by the parent, guardian prior to school is preferred in lieu of temperature checks and symptom screening being performed after arrival to school. And to Mr. Cronin's point, screening of students includes a daily temperature check and periodic completion of a screening questionnaire.
Dr. Simon, might as well ask. So if a student does, we know they have a high temperature, what are we doing with them?
We follow the guidance, which is in our plan, which they have to go to, they have to be separated, they have to go to the nurse, they have to have their parent call, they cannot remain in school.
Okay, that's people want to know that.
Yes.
And how much room do we have?
It's all in. We have, in each school, we're supposed to have 2 spaces to keep that child's kid safe from the children who are coming in because they need a Band-Aid or ice or something, or their regular medication. So that's all under the guidance of our nurse and the building principals to determine the best space in each building.
And Dr. Simon, just to go with Mr. McNamara, we have the personnel. If one student gets sick, how are we getting that student to wherever, and now who's going to watch the door or whatever to start doing the temperature checking? And if you have another one, now you lost another person to, do the temperature checks. And
we will be coming to you with recommendations for additional hall monitors, aides. You've already increased the hours for some at the last meeting to accommodate, knowing that this is some new protocols that we have to have in place. But we do have a nurse in each building. So.
Dr. Simon, this is Nancy Castriovanni. I would encourage you, the monitors, handheld, you do have to start using them because I think they take a little longer than you think to register the temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had a practice going into the Boys and Girls Club today, and it was just 2 of us, and it did take.
Right. So that 30 to 40-second window, those handheld do take a little bit of time to register the temperature. We use them in my company. So you probably will need quite a few monitors for all of them, but you might want to start practicing on yourselves and timing how long it takes.
Is it, you're saying it takes a long time to actually take the temperature or to record the data?
No, we don't just to get the temperature. You have to hold it pretty close, and before the digital, for the temperature, it does take a little bit of time.
I mean, I will go back to my son's camp. They went bang, good, bang, good. I mean,
you saw the temperatures?
Saw it pop up. I watched because my son was going in. I wanted to see it done. They even read out the number.
I'm not sure the brand. I'm just encouraging them to.
I'd like to grant you because every temperature check I've ever had takes a while. We always fiddle with it.
I'm just saying, you've already purchased them, I would encourage you to start testing them and using them.
We did the rapid no
But one
time.
additional complication we have is under the guidance is the person taking the temperature has to be behind some sort of plexiglass.
They can wear a face shield.
And I guess they can wear a face shield, but they also have to have some sort of comfort that they're safeguarding the person who's actually taking the temperature.
No, I'm asking, the shield's not, they didn't have to.
I don't know.
It says PPE or barriers for staff members conducting the screening. Depending on the availability of trained staff and supplies, the following methods are recommended by the CDC for conducting temperature screenings. 1. Ask parents, guardians to take their child's temperature either before coming to the facility or upon arrival to the facility. Upon their arrival, stand at least 6 feet away from the parent, guardian, and child. Ask the parent, guardian to confirm that the child does not have a fever, shortness of breath, or cough. Make a visual inspection of the child for signs of illness, which could include flushed cheeks, rapid breathing, difficulty breathing, fatigue, or extreme fussiness. Use barriers or partition controls for conducting temperature screenings. Perform hand hygiene, wash your hands, put on gloves, check the child's temperature.
I read that to mean a barrier or a partition. The person who's taking the temperature.
Is there anything about collecting the data that we have to, because my concern is a little bit of liability also if the students, or if we're not keeping track of what students we are testing, that
If I'm not mistaken, that was
Those
illegal.
districts though that are only using the questionnaire for screening the building, you know, they must have been checking with their legal teams also, that must be enough somehow.
Well, because the guidance says that that's the way you're supposed to be encouraging them, but I think we all agree that we would, if we could, like something a little bit more where we look at the temperature. It protects everyone, right? If we could look at the temperature of people as they come in. I'm a little concerned. I mean, it would be nice if that was all tied together, so we had multiple checks. So if anybody did bring COVID into school, we could show that we have checked everyone, and that it was either on the app or a temperature scan.
What I would suggest is that we start with the guidance and do both, and then see how compliance goes and how the protocol goes with both. It's a phased-in approach. The guidance from legal is both the parents helping us at home and to have the checked at home, ideally at home, prior to departing to the school day. And then it talks to, this is from the legal guidance, school districts must also use a daily screening questionnaire for faculty and staff reporting to school, periodically for parents, particularly for younger students who may require the assistance, etc. And then it talks about where a parent or guardian has not performed a screening prior to students' arrival at school, or where there is an unscheduled visitor, school district should conduct an on-site temperature screening. They should be coordinated in a manner that prevents individuals from intermingling in close or proximate contact with each other to completion of the screening. A staff member should be present to supervise students waiting to be screened. Personnel performing screening activities should be trained and be familiar with CDC, DOH, and OSHA protocols. School districts must ensure that any personnel performing in-person screening, including temperature checks, are appropriately protected from exposure to potentially infectious individuals and provided with PPE, which includes at a minimum an acceptable face covering or mask, but may also include a gloves, gown, or a face shield. So I think we're...
I have a question regarding the app again. I just can't wrap my brain around it. Why, if somebody is actually taking their child's temperature, or if they're failing one of the questions, they're not going to send their child to school anyway, or they will, knowing that they were in violation of it. So what is the benefit of the app? I can't get my brain around.
It also helps with the questionnaire, so we can send the app the 4 questions that have to be asked every day. So the screening questionnaire can be done through the app.
Okay.
So that's really the benefit of having those questions answered electronically.
And so we just know they're yes, yes, yes. So we can't just assume if somebody's in school, they've actually, so do we feel confident that those questions will be answered and asked to the children, or even factual? I just feel it's a complete false sense of security that you're just asking someone to go through a process that they're most likely not going to go through, just to cover ourselves for whatever mandate is out there. I don't think it's limiting anybody with a fever coming into school that would normally come in. I just don't, I think it's a waste of time, money, effort. I just don't understand any positive to come about from the app at all.
I agree with you about the app in particular,
Yep.
but I think the goal is to have parents as partners, taking their kids' temperature and not sending kids to school if they may be sick.
I agree. I don't think that's
piece.
going to happen, and I worry that it will give us as a district, as a building, a false sense of security that they answer the questions, so they must be healthy when they won't be. And I think we eliminate all of that with scanning everyone's temperature in the morning.
So are we saying scanning and just yes or no, we go in the building?
That's it.
And not
I don't even need to know your name.
Just
I don't need to
that data, right?
Yeah, I don't even need to hold the data. I don't
Which
need
is
to
a
do
FERPA
it.
concern anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it really should. Bus pass? Why do I need to scan your bus pass? Just yes or no. You can go in. You can even do it in the tents outside, so you don't have to have a containment area.
And we already have the no touch them up.
Yeah, I mean, just yes or no. You can come in or you can't.
Guidance that we have to keep track of what we've done.
It just says you can't admit students who have a fever. There's nothing in the guidance
It says
that I
you
saw about
cannot-
retaining the data.
We can't admit students that have a fever.
Basically.
That's the issue. You want to make sure that.
That's the way
But
how
this
we
is-
say
There's
for.
nothing about asking, you don't have to ask the question about whether the child's been exposed to somebody with COVID.
It says periodically for kids and for students and daily for staff.
Oh, so it says you have to periodically ask them.
Okay, so
That's
You
the
have
yes.
to periodically collect that data.
It says
So
collect.
I think the idea is that parents should be checking every day. If you're checking your child's fever every day, they should be checking for COVID symptoms every day. We have to collect that data periodically. We haven't gotten that defined as to what periodically is.
I don't think we're
Staff
going to.
members, it must be collected on a daily basis. So I guess the app, what that does do is allows you to collect the data. However, it doesn't have to be collected on a daily basis, so it's a little bit more onerous than the guideline requires.
I don't see a need for it.
I think the issue is that we should be checking temperatures every day because, as Mr. Cipriani said, other schools are relying on the questionnaire. The question is, when you rely on the questionnaire, how do you track the kid down that didn't complete the questionnaire, right? In order to ensure that they don't have fever before you bring them into school. And that's where
Or that
it's
the
very
data is
complicated and you
factual.
just don't take everyone's temperature.
Well, the app helps you track those that didn't complete the questionnaire.
Exactly, for the app, yes. Like if your colleagues are going with the app, that's one thing. If they're just going with the questionnaire without an app, I don't even know.
I really think that for the first phase, we should do both and then assess how well we're doing with both. I think it's the safest thing to do. Ask parents to take temperature, but also do it here. And then see the compliance and see how the system goes, getting all the kids in through various doors with the handheld. I don't personally see a need for this product.
And the staff would need to go to the app every day or fill out a questionnaire if we didn't have an app. They have to every day.
Yes, and Mr.
Answer those
Cipriani
questions.
has that in place.
So basically we're saying we can use the app for the questionnaire and just use the handhelds as people go into the building. Green, red, proceed.
Correct. Does that make sense to everybody?
So the parents would have an app in order to submit the questionnaire, however, whatever the definition of periodically. And the staff would have it daily basis.
Is that,
Very good question.
Mike, Mr. Cipriani, is that the plan that the parents would use the app or just staff?
Everybody uses it. Everybody uses it. Parents, staff. It would be a link. It would be an app. It would be, you can click on a browser. You can get into the questionnaire that way. And then all the questionnaire data would go by name into a database for somebody to check to see that the question has been filled out.
And do the daily temperature.
Being unreliable, I think there'll be a whole portion of our population that just wouldn't do it. And I just think you would not get.
That's why I'm suggesting we do
That's why
both.
we have to do both.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all agree
Yeah.
that the app is probably not going to be as accurate as the state thinks it will be.
Right, but I also want to see what it's like operationalizing, getting all students in, taking their temperature, how long it takes, how much instructional time is lost, how safe it is. You know, there are pros and cons.
It's almost like you're going to need somebody that is their job, right? Their job in the morning for a few these temperatures.
Could the bus monitor take them as their?
We don't have bus monitors on all buses, and bus drivers will not.
No, I mean when they get off the bus.
Oh,
As they
those
get
are-
off the
those
bus,
are our
they
800.
scan.
I'm sorry, how many thermometers did you?
Right now, I believe we have
We'd like
20.
to 18 to 20 right now, the handhelds.
Okay.
Essentially have 6 in each building.
So I
So
think we
we
just
don't
have,
think it's better to have like a wireless, like, just scan for the kids, like.
I don't know, it's actually-
12 to 14,000 dollars.
and you don't know who it is. The individual boom, 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 I think is the fastest way. That's what, and I know that's what most of my colleagues are using, who've gone.
Maybe we need more than 20.
Right.
You can get it, but at least the app will determine who answered the questionnaire, so we don't have to retain the data of anybody who is.
Yeah.
Yeah, just quick, in. We want kids in as quickly as
So
possible.
the app would accomplish the data aspect
Yes.
of the guidance.
Yes.
And then the temperature would just take care of our concerns.
Correct.
Yeah, just yes,
So then how are we monitoring that people are doing the app if it's not linked to the daily scan? What is periodic, and then who is checking that this family did not fill it out in a timely fashion? And what is the recourse? So let's say we say it's daily or weekly. You know, well, who's checking, you know, X family didn't fill it out this Monday, but their kid came in and didn't have a fever, so they're in class. We now go ask the kid in class, do we send a note to the parents, they have to do it, how?
It's if the guidance isn't there, right?
Well, the guidance says that if the parent can't do it, we have to do it, including the questionnaire. So we gotta look for the symptoms. So I think what happens is any parents who don't complete it, somebody has to be dedicated for data to call up the parents, follow up with the parents, but if they don't do it, we have to do it under the guidance. Because the guidance says that it may not be practical for parents to be able to do it.
And it's gonna be
It's just
hundreds
kids.
of kids a day that.
There's no good,
Well,
there's
there's
no
not-
easy way to accomplish this, let's face
I
it.
don't know.
Yeah, what's periodic?
I spoke to one school district, and they said they're probably gonna have somebody full-time running to all the classrooms to try to figure out who didn't fill in the app, because they know they're not gonna comply.
Right. Heard that as well.
So maybe Dr. Seinfeld, you could give us a list of all those people we need to hire to comply with the 140 pages of guidance that was given by the state.
Don't joke, it's a lot.
I'm not joking.
I know.
Yeah.
Mr. Cipriani has a running list
Oh,
of costs associated with all of this.
Mr. Cipriani's not happy.
So I think we need a motion to
Motion
adjourn
to
to
adjourn to
exec
exec.
session for matters of particular personnel.
Particular personnel. Okay, motion?
so moved.
Second.
Harry?
Thank you, Mr. Rosado. Do you want to take this, or should I leave the clicker?
You can leave it down.
Thank you. All right, so we just have 2 quick items that
Yeah.
So let's make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.